Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole for November 18th. My name is Councillor Hazel Braithwaite, and I'll be acting chair for the meeting tonight. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Coast and Strait Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize and thank the Lekwungen peoples, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt Nations communities, past, present, and future, for their stewardship, care, and leadership on these lands, and that their historic connections to these lands continues to this day. I'd like to start with approval of the agenda. And before I ask for approval, I just would like to ask that we move item 7.1 to right after the public comment and question section so that we can deal with that before a larger item on the agenda. So I'd look for a motion to move the agenda as amended. Thank you. Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. And then adoption of Committee of the Whole minutes. I did have one change on there on page 3. I think there's an extra E in my name. I noticed that. But so I'll just move, ask for a motion to, anybody else have any changes? No. So I'll ask for a motion to adopt the minutes as amended. First moved and seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. And I'll go on to mayor and verbal reports, or yes, mayor and verbal reports. And I'll start on my right with Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Really, the bulk of it is a fairly quiet last couple of weeks. I will just recognize all of the time, and I'm sure my colleagues will also recognize the same, but all the time and effort that went into organizing this year's Remembrance Day ceremony at the Cenotaph on November the 11th, obviously, and as usual, extremely well attended and really well supported by the community, and so pleased to see many members of the community there, and as always, just a real highlight of the year and well organized. I chaired, as usual, the October 24th meeting of the Greater Victoria Public Library Board. The Library Board is beginning to enter into its budget presentation cycle, so I will be presenting this week to the City of Victoria, kicking off our budget presentations for the upcoming year. And then I also acted as liaison to the Heritage Foundation to the meeting of November the 12th. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, and thanks for keeping your comments brief because we do have a lot to get through tonight. So, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, and thank you for the reminder to be brief. In the last little while, or at least since I last reported, as chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, I have attended an orientation session and 2 working meetings during which volunteer members provided input to and then feedback on Oak Bay's draft accessibility plan. It's a very engaged group, and the process is working very smoothly. I was delighted to attend on behalf of Oak Bay the official opening of the Centre for Ocean Applied Sustainable Technology, COAST, which is a SIP initiative, South Island Prosperity Partnership. That was October 16, a full house. There were tours and speeches and an opportunity to look at this flexible workspace that hosts both organizations and individuals working in the blue economy. What else did I want to say? Oh, on November the 1st, I along with Councillor Smart, attended a SIP roundtable to attract and retain family doctors. And there were municipal business, academic leaders, and family physicians. And there were 6 topic areas covered, and I participated in the childcare work table. And this is part of an ongoing initiative to identify areas where local governments can support support physicians coming to and staying in Greater Victoria. So there'll be more work coming out of that. And I'll just say it was fun. I got to hang out on the avenue on Halloween with staff and council colleagues in disguise, handing out candy. Box after box of candy to munchkins and monsters alike. So that's enough for me. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Green.
Thank you. Thank you. I also attended Halloween and did a shift at the municipal tent, and Councillor Watson, truly, I have not forgotten her costume. It was amazing. And there were other great costumes too, and I think the adults had as much fun as the children. I also unfortunately, I could not attend the November 11th Cenotaph site because of my my knee problems, so I watched the whole thing online, and it was very well done, and so I commend the organizers. It was very well done and well attended, as always. I also attended a neighborhood meeting, and that was to discuss cycling in Oak Bay. I also attended, tomorrow is, the Regional Water Supply Commission meeting, and so those are my comments. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Braithwaite. Yes, in addition to many of the local events that I've attended, but I will be brief. October 22nd, we did hold the Planning Commission meeting that was held here in the hall. October 24th, attended the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee, presented the draft budget. I'm kind of a committee of one doing the budget for them, but we presented it, and that has now been passed on to the CRD for finalization and then returned to the committee. Also, I attended the Crest Executive Building and Finance Committees because it is budget time on all of those. So we also got to have a great Zoom presentation that had the drone overhead, so we didn't have to drive all the way out to Langford to look at the new construction site. We could enjoy it from the comforts of home. And like most of the members of council here, I attended the Remembrance Day service at the Cenotaph on November the 11th. I also attended the Indigenous Remembrance Day ceremony in downtown Victoria on November the 8th, and as well zoomed in remotely to participate with so many others in the memorial service for the late Justice Murray Sinclair. Certainly dear to all Manitobans, is the first Indigenous justice appointed in Manitoba, and I believe they had an attendance of about 15,000 people, so it was remarkable, and it was a wonderful memorial service. I also, on November 10th, though, I attended Tree Appreciation Day at Uplands Park, so it was nice to see all of the public works people out there and the volunteer groups, and I did go on the tour of Uplands to view the results of the work that has been done with the Garry Oak Recovery Team and the volunteer members of the community to remove invasive species over the last year. And it was really remarkable when you got out there now, and now that it is all just dried grass and barren land, but you can see how much work has been done clearing the large meadows. So it was really quite noticeable. It was very evident, all the work that had gone on, and they've tarped off now large sections of Uplands Park to kill off more of the grasses and whatnot, and get ready for the continuation of the replacement with the native species plants next spring. And so with that concludes my remarks.
Thank you so much, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been it was nice to reflect back on this month. There have been so many things as have been mentioned. The healthcare workshop at UVic. I did attend Halloween on the Avenue, which was really fun, as well as Tree Appreciation Day, where in addition to learning how to plant a tree and going for an amazing tree walk, I got to go up in the truck with the cherry picker, which was amazing. I also attended an online workshop for elected leaders working together to support mental health. I attended the almost standing room only Cool Kid event at the Windsor Pavilion on biodiversity. Those events are always so well attended by the community, which is really appreciated. And I also attended the Pro Arts Alliance Regional Arts Awards, where recipients were literally laughing and crying due to the emotions of sharing and hearing about all the dedication of our amazing arts champions in our community, doing so much great work that at times goes unappreciated. And so it was amazing to have an evening hearing everybody appreciate our hardworking arts community. Thanks.
Thanks so much. And Mayor Murdoch.
Thank you, Chair. For those who don't know, we have a rotating acting mayor rotation, and the acting mayor chairs committee of the whole, so I haven't lost my job yet. But Councillor Braithwaite will be ably chairing this meeting. I do my regular updates as chair, but I'm at the council meetings. But just a couple of things. One, I just want to thank the participants of the artist tour, the studio tour. This is the 25th anniversary, which is a big deal. Interesting this year, returning from a time away, but one is the Imka Pearson. I just wanted to recognize her. She initiated that event sort of under the table at first, and former Mayor Christopher Costin and her and others worked to actually legitimize it, and it's been going officially now for 25 years. So she's in it again this year and showing off her art. I also just thought I'd point out one of the artists on that tour is Donna Ion, and we put out Christmas cards every year, so we try and use the local artists. So this is this year's Christmas card for those of you who are interested. So we just got those back from the printer. Just to get people know, I was re-elected as Capital Regional Hospital District Chair. But my former acting chair, which is what they call a vice chair at the hospital district, Mayor McNeil Smith has moved into the chair of the CRD, and Mayor Goodmanson is now my new acting chair. Just a heads up to the community at large, the CRD has 3 potential new services being contemplated that are going out for alternate approval process for community input. One of those is a Foodlands or food security service. One is a transportation service, and one is a biodiversity and environmental stewardship service, which is not entirely new. It's kind of a bit of a shifting of existing services for the most part. Also, just want to let people know that the board approved some increases to parking fees at there's 2 lakes, Letus Lake and 2 potholes that have paid parking within the CRD park system, and they're both going to have incremental increases to parking fees over the next 3 years. So just a heads up on that. So go this summer if you can. I think it's going from $2 to $2.50 for parking, but still, there you go. That concludes my remarks. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks so much. I'll be very brief as well. I attended basically all of the same events as the other councillors did. I would like to say a big thank you to the Parks Department for the Tree Appreciation Day. They always do such a great job. The Remembrance Day ceremony, and also there was a great night that the Canadian College of Performing Arts put on that the mayor and I attended at Oak Bay High School, and that was really, really great, along with the band of the 5th Field Regiment, Royal Canadian Artillery. And there was a very successful bazaar at Monterey. I don't know how much money they made. We can probably ask Mr. Meikle later, but it was always wonderful to see that happen. And the BIA, not only did they do Halloween on the Avenue, but this weekend it's the Oak Bay Light Up. So at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you can go and enjoy games, etc. 3 o'clock the entertainment starts, and at 5 o'clock Santa and Mrs. Claus arrive on the fire truck on Oak Bay Avenue. So we hope to see all of you there. And yeah, for the Royal Macpherson Theatre Society, I attended and spoke at the CRD meeting, and also the Performing Arts Select Committee, and we had a couple of board meetings, and we're now in the search for a new executive director for the Royal Macpherson Theatre Society, and that is well underway. And the Oak Bay Track meeting, we have now signed the MOU, and things are moving along quite nicely for the Oak Bay Track. And that's all of my comments, so thank you. So we're going to move on now to public comment and question period. So how this will work is that anyone can come up and speak to something that is not on the agenda. If you're online, you can raise your hand. If you're phoning, the phone number is 1-855-703-8985, and you can go *9 to raise your hand. If you're in this room, please just come forward to the table, and you will have 3 minutes to speak, and please put your comments through the chair, and just remember that you are being recorded. Okay, so if anybody in the room would like to come forward to speak to an item that is not on the agenda, please come forward. Just press the middle button.
Okay. Diana Butler at 2149 Granite Street, just across the street from here. And I'm going to talk about the blasting that's occurring and the work that's occurring at 2135 Granite Street. And I've been encouraged to do that because if anybody has seen the site, it is absolutely horrendous. Some time ago, I appeared before council raising a number of concerns regarding blasting. Unfortunately, those concerns have come to pass, leaving my husband and I with a damaged house and potentially being out of pocket for thousands of dollars to retain the services of a structural engineer and a lawyer and to achieve remediation of the damage. It's not very funny, believe me, to face that. Since Labor Day, we have been under siege from rock excavation, moving, removal, drilling, blasting, and hoeing. Day after day, reaching decibel levels in excess of 110 for hour after hour. On September 5th, we were informed in an email from Motion Construction, and I quote, "The drilling will take 3 to 5 days, and the blasting and excavation will take 5 days as well." We were also told that it would be minimal. It has been anything but. The blaster estimated 30 days. It has actually taken twice as long, and it's still not finished. Was the blasting permit altered to accommodate these distance differences? Where was the geotech advice? What staff oversight has there been of what is going on? It's hard not to think that we have been led a not so very merry dance. As if this was not enough, one of the most discouraging things we have encountered has been the lack of responsiveness from the municipality. First of all, why did no one seem to call for house designs that would not completely destroy the site's natural landscape? Why, once it became known that the site was rock through and through, was the contractor not required to modify the house designs to fit the topography and avoid the massive amount of drilling, blasting, and rock removal that has occurred? Where are the design guidelines to accommodate infill housing, and especially on lots like this? On Sunday morning, we sent an email requesting a cease and desist order on the operations at 2135 to allow for the damage to our house to be assessed and to avoid further damage as a result of continuing work. It took over 23 hours to get a single response that staff would investigate, but how and when was left unanswered. The bylaw officer said he could do nothing, that he couldn't prove the damage came from the work being conducted at 2135. But of course, by that reasoning, he couldn't prove that it didn't either. And that was why we wanted the cease and desist order, so we could identify what the cause was. As far as I know, we didn't have an earthquake between Friday morning and Friday afternoon when the damage occurred. What does Section 24(6) B of the Building and Plumbing Bylaw mean? Why does it not apply to this situation? In the absence of an order, today at least 12 blasts took place. We were out for part of the day, so maybe there were probably more. The blasting was within 1 foot of our west property line and our front porch, and 3 to 4 feet from the house itself. We have a new crack in our foundation to add to the others. We are still coping with a jammed basement door that cannot be opened and a lift that is also jammed, making it extremely difficult for my disabled husband to get to the street. I think this could be considered a safety issue. One last thing for now. It is time to correct a myth that one's house insurer will cover damage such as we have incurred. We have investigated this matter. Our home insurer has told us, quote, something like blasting is considered earth movement in the insurance wordings, and this is not something that any insurance company will cover. Her advice has been corroborated by several others. It is time to put this myth to bed, including erasing it from the municipal website. I certainly hope that nobody else ever has to go through what we have experienced, and we have lived in that house for 47 years. It has been a nightmare. Raised blood pressure, sleepless, worried nights, mind-numbing noise, an inability to listen to the radio, engage in a conversation, watch TV, or even listen to anything on your computer, or entertain friends and family in the house. We have to move around. We have to go to the one room that might be okay to hear somebody speak, given the noise level, heightened stress levels, and still it goes on. So thank you. It's very upsetting.
Thank you, Ms. Butler. Yes, thank you for coming and speaking to us, and I know that staff is in receipt of some of the information that you've sent, so thank you for that. Would anyone else like to come forward to speak for this time? Yes, please come forward and just state your name and municipality, and you will have 3 minutes. Thank you.
My name is Tony Otten. I live at 1648 Wilmot Place. I have been before this council before with regard to the public works. my previous time here was somewhat negative, but I would like to take this opportunity to finally commend Public Works Management for coming up with a plan to address residents' issues. The noise, the pollution,
I'm
the potential.
sorry, sir. I think that that item is on the agenda later on tonight, so that would be the time to speak to that item. And I'm not sure if it's even speakable for this first staff, is it? Or Mary, you may have a comment on that.
You might ask staff on this one. I'm just thinking it's last on the agenda tonight. I'm just wondering if we can allow for an exception if there's just one speaker here today.
I,
Or some sorry, through you, Chair.
Thank you, Your Worship, or Chair Braithwaite. Council would have to suspend the council procedure bylaw in order to do that because public speaking on a particular item on the agenda must be done when that item is presented.
I would move that we suspend the procedure bylaw to allow the speaker to speak at this time.
thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so thank you, sir. You may continue.
problem.
Yeah.
So it's been a long 5 years of significant concerns over public works, which I've made quite clear in writing. But I would like to commend Public Works Management for finally coming up with a plan for this council that is well thought out, addresses the issues that have been raised over the last 4 or 5 years. So I would seriously like to recommend to this council that you take very seriously the recommendations that have been put forth by Public Works Management, because failure to do so going forward will create a potential catastrophic situation for Oak Bay. It's dangerous, it's unsafe for your staff, for local residents, and that's basically all I would like to ask this council to seriously take this issue under your consideration and make the right call. Thank you. That's all I wish to say.
Thank you very much. And I'm assuming we don't need another motion we can just continue on with the agenda? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so now we have moved up to item number 7.1 up in the agenda. So we will go to that, and I believe that Mr. Meikle will have a bit of a staff report to present for this item.
Hello. Thank you, Chair. So as you're aware, and back on October 21st, our last Committee of the Whole meeting, Council received a presentation from the Victoria Hockey Legacy Society regarding a centennial celebration of the Victoria Cougars winning of the Stanley Cup in 1925. So this is a unique opportunity to celebrate a centennial anniversary of that kind of significance here in Oak Bay. And we certainly welcome the opportunity to work with the Victoria Hockey Legacy Society. Council at that time asked staff to come back with a impact analysis report, which is before you. The event certainly will bring large numbers of people from the region to the Oak Bay Recreation Centre, and certainly has some potential to expose our services to new customers and new potential users. Staff have also continued to work closely with the organizing committee to continue to refine and the plans and organization for the event, and causing some shifting of things in our parking lot to meet fire standards. And we've met with Oak Bay Fire as well and have received their support to this point. In terms of impacts, I think it's important to note what we've calculated here and what we've looked at in terms of the financial impact for council is has a couple of phases to it. So one being consideration that all the parking lots, our primary parking lots, would be used for the event. And of course, an event of that nature will draw, as we mentioned, many people to the event. So parking will be at a premium. We're very well aware from feedback from our regular patrons that anytime parking is a bit of a challenge, they often choose not to come. So we did factor that into what would be considered potential lost revenues over that weekend. The arena itself would be used for the event, and so any of our regular rentals and user groups of the arena would would be displaced for that weekend as well. So that's been factored into that. In terms of additional costs, we'd be looking at primarily simply additional maintenance staff to support the event. As the organizing committee had asked for, there would be a staff liaison assigned beginning relatively soon to work with the organizing committee leading up to the event and certainly debriefing and closing the event after that. And then probably additional skate patrol staff, et cetera, skate shop staff to support event goers that weekend. Those are primarily the costs that we would see impacting the Parks, Rec and Culture Department for that weekend. There certainly would be probably some added benefits to our lounge services, but the event also is looking to host food trucks as well. So a little tough to predict what that might look like for our lounge services upstairs. But overall, I think it's a positive opportunity for the district to celebrate its hockey legacy, so to speak, which is probably not well known in the region, but does provide some opportunity to do that and hopefully bring some new users to our center. So I'm here that we've got a few members from the committee here to answer questions potentially, as am I prepared to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Meikle. And how we'll handle this now is we'll come to this table for any questions from council, and then we will go to the public. And as you've mentioned, we do have some members of the organizing committee that are here that will be able to answer questions as well. So I'm going to come to this table. Is there anybody who has any questions in regards to this item? I'll go to Councillor Patterson first.
Yes, thank you, Chair Braithwaite. Just a question. I'm wondering if there are any, if there is any funding left in the grant funding for 2024 that could be advanced to this event or not?
I think is Mr. Meikle, can you take that, or Ms. LaChance?
I would have to ask Ms. LaChance for some advice there.
Thank you. Ms. LaChance?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, perhaps I could clarify on which grant funding we're being asked about.
Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, this is the discretionary, council's discretionary grant funding.
Thank you. Ms. LaChance.
Yes, thank you. Let me pull that up and I will respond as soon as I've got that.
Thank you. Is there any other questions that you want to ask in the meantime? No? Okay. Now we go to our commercial interlude. No, just kidding. Ms. LaChance will have that any moment, I'm sure.
My apologies. My system has decided to cause me some grief, but I
okay.
would be able to provide other alternatives for council if the chair is amenable.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine. Thank you so much.
I do recall that there is a unallocated grant amount remaining. Based on my memory, there would be not enough money to cover the entire cost that's been forecasted or estimated by staff. That would then take council to consider either balancing that in the future upcoming financial plan as articulated in the staff report, or as an additional alternative, council could consider historical allocation of unappropriated surplus. Another way of saying that is the unallocated surplus remaining from 2022 and 2023. Council may recall having received a report October 15th where only a portion of that surplus was allocated.
Thank you so much, Ms. LaChance. Anything else, Councillor Patterson? No. I'll go to Mayor Murdoch and then Councillor Smart and then Mayor Murdoch.
Well, thank you, Chair Braithwaite. Through you, Chair, to Mr. Meikle, I wonder, actually, I'll let you decide who would be best to answer this, but I'm wondering how much coordination may have happened already with the BIA with regards to potentially, for instance, providing food for the event, thinking of the Spring Nosh and things like that. I just wonder if there's been any outreach to the BIA to coordinate local businesses, either providing food or having input on the event.
I can tell you that the president of the BIA actually sits on the committee, so, but Mr. Meikle, you may have something to add to that? No, so they are well aware, I think, yeah. Mayor Murdoch.
Yeah, through you, Chair. It's really a question for maybe representative of the organizing committee. Just, I'm curious, we have our costs here, most of which are in kind, but there is some hard dollars. I think it'd be helpful for us to understand the context of how many volunteers are involved in this, what other things, I know there's a hockey rink being provided, there's a few other things going on as part of this. I think it would be helpful for me, I think for the body, to understand what this ask is in the context, maybe even a little bit of what might be happening over the weekend.
So Ms. McFarland, if you could come forward. Ms. McFarland is the co-chair of the organization.
I wish to thank Steve for all the work he's done on this report, and thank you, Mayor Murdoch, for that question. We only have Scotiabank Hockey Day in Canada to think about, and we know the size of that event, and we know the size of this event approximately. I would say it's like 50 to 100. I know it's a big number. 50 to 100 volunteers may be needed for the various sites. Oak Bay Recreation, I know that we'll be using staff. Specifically, there are some insurance situations where you have to have your own skate staff working, but we'll have volunteers at all of the sites, which include out in the parking lot at Oak Bay Rec. We'll have activities at the Penny Farthing. We will have some activities at the Barden Banker as well. So 50 to 100 volunteers is my estimate. But to speak to your other questions, Mayor Murdoch, what other things are happening, if I may, I'll just kind of give you a list of what we have envisioned. We will have a public launch on December 10th. This will be at the Penny Farthing. This will be social media posts and a press event at the Penny Farthing. So our launch essentially December 10th. March 27th, music night at the Barden Banker. So stay tuned for some exciting musicians and competition. March 29th, there will be an alumni game, hopefully at Oak Bay Recreation. So we do have interest from the Detroit Red Wings as well. They share a heritage with the Victoria Cougars, as the Victoria Cougars eventually, they left after the 1925 Stanley Cup victory. They went to Detroit. They became the Detroit Cougars and then eventually became the Detroit Red Wings. We have been in touch with them. We've had a video meeting with them. They will celebrate their 100th anniversary in the 2025-2026 season. They would like us to participate in their celebration, and we would like them to participate in ours. So they are working on in which way they will participate. The Detroit Red Wings are playing the Vancouver Canucks on February 2nd. They've invited us to attend that game, just to meet some of the people from the Detroit Red Wings. So the alumni game is on the 29th. On March 29th, we'll have a 135-person gala at the Oak Bay Beach Hotel. On March 29th, we will have programmed ice rink, programmed synthetic can ice rink in the parking lot, hopefully, and 2 ball hockey rinks. March 30th, we will have the same programmed ice, let's call it cold ice, synthetic ice, ball hockey. The exciting day is Sunday, March 30th, the actual 100th anniversary of the Stanley Cup win. And on that day, we'll have the arrival of the Stanley Cup by procession. The route is to be determined, but probably Oak Bay Avenue and then determined after that. It will be a procession on a double-decker red bus. We hope to have a police escort. We hope to have a Harbor Cats, the baseball club, vehicle in that procession. And the Vancouver Canucks have offered Finn, the mascot, and Finn's van to be in that procession. Hopefully, we can talk to the fire department, see if they will join that procession. So just a spectacle for the community to watch. We're not looking to close roads or anything. We will just tell everyone the time of that procession, a nice photograph opportunity potentially. We will also have a stage component, hopefully here, again, in the parking lot of Oak Bay Recreation Center. And the stage component would include welcomes, some speeches. The Courtnall Society for Mental Health would be one of the benefactors of any merchandise sales, any profits from merchandise sales. We intend to sell merchandise like these sweaters and like the ball cap in the back here. That will be the primary source of charitable donation to the Courtnall Society for Mental Health. The Courtnall Society has already asked to have a speaker on the stage. This speaker is an organization that has benefited from the services of the Courtnall Society for Mental Health. So there'll be a speaking component. There will be a legacy component, is our hope. And what else did I put on the 30th? Yeah, welcomes, legacy piece, and First Nations component as well. And there may be an after party at the Penny Farthing after all of the festival activities on Sunday, March 30th. That will be for various organizers, volunteers, alumni, not sure. We're working on those details, but several days of celebration, many opportunities for the community to participate. Many opportunities for First Nations involvement and volunteer opportunities.
Thank you so much, Ms. McFarland, and also a lot of opportunities for youth hockey as well, and they will be a recipient of some of the funds as well, correct?
Yes. I have written myself a note. There are some things we have worked on. So the merchandise sales would be more for Courtnall Society, but the concepts we have talked about is a 50-50 raffle, perhaps at the alumni game, a possible silent auction or auction, and fundraising at the pub events that are hosted by Matt McNeil at Victoria Pub Co. So we're working on ways to raise funds. Those funds would go to minor hockey. Thank you for the reminder,
Thank you so much.
Braithwaite.
Next I have, are you finished, Mayor Murdoch? Yeah. Next I have Councillor Green, and then Councillor Watson, then Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Mr. Meikle, and thank you very much for being here today. Just a question on the parking implications, and I'm more aware than I used to be of accessible parking facilities and trying to meet the needs of people with mobility issues. I just wondered if has there been any thought put into that aspect? You've detailed the implications, which are helpful. But I just wondered if there was any further thought about how people with mobility issues might access not only the event, but the 50% of the activities that will be remaining at the rec center. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, through the chair. Between ourselves and the organizing committee, we haven't quite discussed those details yet, although the way the event appears to be set up in the lower parking lot right in front of the building there, a little hard to describe if you're familiar with the building, but the parking spaces basically right by the front door are still available and will still be available. We'll probably have to work out a traffic control person to allow people to get in there and park, and especially those with mobility issues, but that's been on our mind throughout this, and so there's that opportunity as well as some opportunity still up on B Street, which people park at now and get into the rec center from there. So,
thank you.
Is that it, Councillor Green? Yeah. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair Braithwaite. It might be a question for both the sponsor and Oak Bay. I'm just curious about how you predict numbers for an event like this, and what kind of provisions would be made for crowd control and sort of public safety, and if you have any sense, given the popularity of hockey and the nature of this particular event, what kinds of visitor load would there be in and around the rec center and in the village, for example?
Thank you. So should I go to Mr. Meikle first? No, I'll go to Ms. McFarland.
Pardon me while I turn my head to my colleagues and see if someone wants to take this. Anyone feel really equipped for that one? No? Okay. Okay, I will say we are not, some of us in the room are very experienced with events. the Greater Victoria Sports Tourism Commission is represented here. But I'll say the rest of the committee, we are but mostly a committee of volunteers, and our primary experience is with something enormous. From my experience, Scotiabank Hockey Day in Canada, from my recollection, was 20,000 people. Am I right there, Keith? Anywhere near that? I think around 20,000 people attended. We gave away more toques than has ever been given away at a hockey day in Canada ever. And that was 12,000 toques. They've never given away, they've never run out of toques. So this was the largest hockey day in Canada ever for this event. So Victoria did a very good job. One way to predict is just to look at budget. Like our budget is about 37% of what it was for Hockey Day in Canada. So if I extrapolate and just say 37% of all that, that's my only way to really calculate numbers here. So about 20,000 visitors down at Ship Point, 37% of that potentially could be a good way to extrapolate.
And that would be 37% over the 2 days.
It is. Thank you. Our entire budget, yes, our budget for this is about 37% of what it was for Hockey Day in Canada.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Watson? No. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to staff. I'm just wondering about just a financial analysis thing here. So I'm just talking about there's an impact through monetary impact through service disruptions, and then there's a request to waive rental fees. And so I'm just trying to square the two things where it basically says, okay, there's going to be a service level disruption, which makes sense, and it talks about the primary rentals in the arena, sports TV lounge, indoor sports field would be canceled for the duration of events. This makes sense. So the rentals would be canceled. That rental, there's a financial cost to the loss of the rental fee for the period of time. But then later on in the waived rental fees, it talks about the lost arena rental revenues of $11,000 under waived rental fees. So if it seems like a double count to me, because I'm thinking we lose that revenue once essentially. So I guess it depends on how you calculate it, but in a way, isn't that sort of like not actually a monetary? There's a monetary loss on one side, but then it's an in-kind donation on the other side. Not necessarily, we wouldn't be paying maybe we are actually paying ourselves for the lost revenue, and it would come out of one account and into Parks and Rec. So maybe that's what I'm understanding.
Thank you. Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, through the chair. We grappled with that point for a while ourselves, and come to the place where, either way you slice it, the Oak Bay Rec Center itself would not be receiving either of those revenue streams. So it, yes, could be taken as a double counting, I suppose, given the arena might just offset itself. But on a weekend, any given weekend, and that weekend in particular, we'd be bringing in 11,000. If we were canceling that group of people to bring in another event, we'd be charging that event at least that 11,000. So we were trying to grapple with that ourselves. How do we sort of show that calculation of saying, at the end of the day, we wouldn't be bringing in any revenues for that, and we wouldn't actually generally operate that way other than with council's permission to do an in-kind donation. So we just wanted to paint the picture there that there were those two sides of potential revenues, and neither of them would be coming to us. But yes, you probably at the end of the day, you're only going to charge one or the other. So correct.
Thank you. And Councillor Appleton, another question? Yes.
Okay, so thank you. So just to follow up on that, I think I get it, possibly. So if we're talking about the event cost to the District of Oak Bay, and as far as the report goes, $79,400. So there is a built-in, that's not necessarily all cash then, as I understand it. There's $11,000 of value there that's an in-kind value produced. So then but it does say that the one-time funding of $79,400 will be funded through taxation, which would represent 0.22%. So in fact, not that whole $79,400 is being funded by taxation. It's that number minus a certain amount of in-kind donation, unless that funding is being taken from one line item in the municipal budget and being moved to Parks and Rec to cover a lost fee, if I understand that.
Meikle.
Yeah, thank you. And that is, essentially, it would have an impact on our operating budget, on our bottom line at the end of the day. So without either revenues coming in, so the typical rentals we would have on that weekend or the charge for the event to come in, wouldn't show any of that. So we're just trying to make clear that that does have this kind of impact on our budget. Ultimately, it wouldn't be, as you say, it's not a direct cash donation to the organizers, so to speak. It's all an in-kind use of the building. But in the meantime, we're also trying to show there is this impact that we would normally do this kind of revenue and we're not. So it has that impact on our budget at the end of the day. So if that hopefully makes some sense. But so the only real double up cost is the arena rental fees. The other rental fees are not double up costs. Yeah. So 11,000 may be a double up potentially, but again, as we looked at it and had many discussions about, it's either way, those revenues aren't coming to support our operating budget.
Thank you. Another question, Councillor Appleton?
Yeah, Chair, thank you. And I mean, it might just be picking up from an earlier question that was asked, which was with respect to, and I think Ms. LaChance is looking into unallocated revenue. And I think that there was that was going to be my follow-up question, was whether or not some or all could be covered by unallocated surplus revenue at this stage of the game. I seem to remember that there was potentially enough available to cover at least the substantive component of this. So just some clarity around the balance and the amount available, and that's a hard number to just pull out on the fly, and I appreciate staff's attention to that, but it would be nice to know whether or not there's a possibility for that. Thank you.
Thank you, and that was my question too. So going back to you, Ms. LaChance, looking at the unallocated grants and the historical allocation of the surplus remaining from this year, to see if that could cover the whole cost or a large portion of the cost of this.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. Thank you to Council for your patience as I was able to restart my browser and get the balance remaining on the grants and aid that was unallocated. So there's $6,700 remaining from the council grants that were allocated in 2024. And then you do remember correctly that we do have a remaining unappropriated or unallocated surplus. Just a slight correction for clarity for council is that the surplus that's unappropriated is for previous years, 2022 and 2023. We don't yet know of a surplus for 2024, so those would be the amounts we'd be looking at allocating. Given the grants and aid amount, if council so chooses, with $6,700, the remaining, based on the revised math, with the discussion around the 11,000, we'd have make up the total of $68,400 from the unappropriated surplus.
Thank you. So if my understanding is correct, then if we use those two funds, then there would be no future impact on taxes. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, yes, that's correct, if council so chooses.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have, I'll go to second speakers, Councillor Smart, and then I'll go to the public in case the public has any questions as well. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, just one quick follow-up question based on the discussion around accessibility. And I appreciate knowing that there will be some parking available on two side streets. I guess what I'm wondering is this group committed to making a very brief accessibility plan that would basically look at things like designating those as accessible and drop-off zones, as well as accessible porta potties, rest areas, other things? I expect so, but I just didn't want to assume. So, thank you.
Go to Mr. Meikle for this.
Thank you, through the chair. Just to clarify, the actual parking I was speaking of is right down and basically at our front door. It's not on a side street, so it's as close to the building as you can get, really. So, and I'll turn it over to Ms. McFarland.
Thank you. Good question. And yes, we are committed to making sure this is an accessible event in every way, even on the ice surfaces. There will be accessibility on the ice surfaces and the ball hockey surfaces. Yes, we have some members of the team that are particularly skilled at those kinds of conversations and even connecting with fire departments and things, people that really know this stuff. Yes, we are committed to that. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Okay, if I see no further questions around this table, is there any questions from any members of the audience or online? Sure. As part of the committee, you can come up if you like. Come up to the front and just state your name and municipality of where you live.
So my name is Chris Graham. I'm the Chair of Community Engagement. I just wanted to further clarify something that Brenda had said in terms of the community program. This is very much a family-oriented event, so I know there was mention of minor hockey, which certainly will be part of the event, but what we're really looking at this as being a very inclusive event for anybody to come down with their family members. There's always going to be activities for everybody from those that are experienced to skating to those that have never skated before or even played hockey before. We've got, as an example, floorball all day long for families to come in and try. So I just wanted to clarify, it's very much, we're looking at this as being very much a community event. So thank you.
So very much.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no one else from the audience who would like to speak, then I'm going to come back to this table. And
Move receipt of the report.
Move receipt and second. Usually don't have discussion on that, so all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you. If you'd like to continue.
Sure, I'm happy to move that the proposal for hosting the centennial celebration of the Victoria Cougar Stanley Cup victory and the associated costs to the District of Oak Bay be approved by council. And I would add, and that staff be directed to fund any direct costs in 2025 through funds available in the council grants fund reserve or prior year surpluses.
Second.
Second. Any discussion on this motion? Do you need to motivate it all, or?
I don't think I need to motivate much. I hope that language is sufficient to kind of give some flexibility as to using up the grant funding that we have remaining this year, but also use up the prior year surpluses if it's not, or if there's some additional money required. In terms of motivating, I think this is great. I mean, BC's won the Stanley Cup twice, once in 1915, once in 1925. Vancouver had a chance to celebrate in 2015. We get a chance to celebrate in 2025, and it's something of a sort of an interesting fluke that the arena where the Stanley Cup was won is right across the street from the rec center, and we have space available to set. And also just interesting, like a year after this Hockey Day in Canada happened, so there's all this organizing skills and experience and this artificial ice ice rink that's available, that all these things I think have come together very nicely for this. So I think it's has the opportunity to be a great community building event. So I don't think I need to say much more than that. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
Just quickly, through you, Chair, thank you very much again. I just want to say that I think this will benefit our local economy as well. I think apart from being family-oriented, and I think these days we all need some joy. So this sounds like a joyful community event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and Councillor Appleton. Mr. Smart.
Thank you. Very happy to support this amazing event. Just a point of clarification around the wording of the motion. I thought I might have heard 2025, and can I just have a point of clarification around my understanding was maybe that the grant funding would be from 2024 as well as the unallocated surplus from 2022, 2023. And I just wanted to clarify if that was the intent of the motion.
Thank you, and Mayor Murdoch.
So the clarification was that I took the wording out of part of the report, that staff be directed to fund any direct costs in 2025. So the events in 2025 through funds available through this year's 2024 grant funds and or prior year surpluses.
Okay, good. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to get even more pedantic on something His Worship just said. Is the intent, just for clarification on the motion, absolutely in support, is the clarification that the entirety of the balance of the grants and aid be dispensed first, and then with the balance to come from surplus? I'm not... The current wording is and/or, and I'm just wondering whether that's necessary, whether we just want to make the statement to say the grants will be expended and then go from there.
Thank you. Mayor Murdoch.
Well, my intention was that was the order. I just was sort of leaving it a bit in reserve in case there were some other little grant that had to be allocated this year I wasn't aware of, but yes, that's the intention.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just say that, yes, I'm very supportive of this as well. I think that in the staff report, it talked about this being a rare and unique opportunity, and it really, truly is for our community. It happens once in 100 years. None of us in this room will be around for the next 100 years. So yeah, well, some may. probably not. So I'm really, really happy to support this. I think that the committee has done a wonderful job of organizing everything, and you have a great track record from the Hockey Day in Canada. And so, yes, so I'm very supportive of this. So, hearing no other comments, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you very much for coming. Okay, we will now move into the regular agenda, back to the regular agenda. So we're back to item number 6.1, which is the infill housing program recommendations and suggested approach. And I believe we have it'll be Director Bowl first to speak to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A short introduction, and then I'll hand it over to Ms. Rommel for a short presentation. And we're also joined by Ms. Elmore, Jeanette Elmore online from Modus. Today we return to you about the infill housing program, as promised earlier this year during the spring when we had limited time to put together an infill housing program really quickly within the provincial timelines. A number of and some of those were informed by public input, others by council discussion. And there's also one or two items that are a result from designers working on plans for these projects and over the last couple of months having pointed out a couple of things to us. So we're continuing to build and polish the infill housing regulations in the zoning bylaw, but there are also a number of bigger other recommendations that require more work. And Ms. Rommel will comment on that in a moment. The focus of this review that we did over the last couple of months with a team of professionals from Modus that included urban designers, arborists, architects, and senior planners. The focus of these proposed changes is ease of implementation, but also maintaining community character through careful site planning, and in that sense, we did run some additional models for site planning and for massing and articulation, not quite getting into design guidelines and the details of what the building exactly looks like, because that's something that Council took off the list in July. But nonetheless, a number of other things that will put the finishing touches on the infill housing program zoning bylaw regulations. So with that introduction, I'd like to, if the Chair's permission, hand it over to Ms. Rommel for a short presentation.
Thank you very much. And before we do that, I just want to mention to the gentleman in the audience that's waiting for the Elgin Road, this particular item that we're talking about right now could take a little bit of time, so you may want to go home and watch online unless you're happy sitting there listening to all of this as well. But just to give you that option. Thank you. And Ms. Rommel.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight we will be presenting the infill housing program and the next phase, as well as the recommendations and suggested approach. The outline for this evening's presentation is a background and overview. Moving into the next phase, recommended approach to refining the infill housing program, both the immediate actions, future actions, and staff recommendations. In 2022, Council endorsed the infill housing strategy, and implementation of the strategy was scheduled for 2023, but was paused when the province announced the legislative changes to increase housing supply. Bill 44, or the provincial small-scale multi-unit housing legislation, required municipalities to allow small-scale multi-unit housing in areas otherwise restricted to single-family and duplex homes. Now, the district's housing action program aims to meet the new provincial housing program requirements and deliver council priority projects related to housing. Council Priority Project 72, update zoning bylaw to meet the small-scale multi-unit housing requirements, focuses on responding to the small-scale multi-unit housing legislative requirements for the June 30th deadline. The infill housing program was established based on the 3 guiding principles to provide diverse housing options, ensure ease of implementation, and cherish what the community loves as outlined in the infill housing strategy. The bylaws were drafted and presented to Council for consideration. Once adopted, they established the infill housing program. Here we have a timeline of when that took place from June over to a current date, which is November 18th, where we're reporting back to council on the key topics for further analysis for the next phase of infill housing. So these topics for this phase of work were identified through the Special Committee of the Whole on May 16th and the Special Council meeting on June 3rd and the infill housing strategy and by staff through the process. The key topics to be reviewed were tree protection, retention of existing homes, permeable and impermeable site coverage, driveway widths and access, and site planning options in relation to infill housing viability and the protection of community character. The consultant's report is included in tonight's staff report as attachment 1. There are 53 recommendations for council to consider. They range from minor to major. They represent a large body of work, and they include recommendations for bylaw amendments, program and policy development, and cross multiple departments. It's important to think of the approach in refining the infill housing program as an iterative approach, and that these aspects of planning and design are very interrelated. These recommendations seek to continue with the principles from the infill housing strategy, and the recommendations also take into consideration being responsive to applicants. Here, this just outlines the different sections of the recommendations of the report and shows the number of recommendations associated with each of those sections. The most prevalent recommendations relate to tree protection, which is 12. Next is retention of homes at 9, and height comes in at 7 recommendations. So to implement the full suite of the consultant's 53 recommendations at this time, as outlined in the staff report, it would extend beyond the scope, timeline, and budget of Council Priority Project 72 to update the zoning bylaw to accommodate for small-scale multi-unit housing. And it would exceed existing staff capacity within the Community Building and Planning Services Department, and it may negatively impact the ability to meet the next legislated deadline of December 31st, 2025 for the OCP and zoning bylaw updates. So we clustered these into 2 categories. The first criteria is outlined on the slide here. Relatively minor and straightforward to implement, do not require more study or analysis, are more critical to the immediate implementation and support of the effectiveness and uptake of the infill housing program, and directly support Council's priority of housing, and require fewer resources across departments and are focused on the zoning bylaw. There are 30 recommendations that fall into this category, and they're supported by greater detail in the consultant's report. I'm going to quickly run through them through the immediate actions. There's 5 slides on this. So, starting with tree protection, require at least 1 consolidated live landscaping area for the purpose of providing sufficient soil volumes to grow trees in small lot zones, and the recommended area is 35 meters squared. Moving over to height, update the definition to combine and simplify the concept of building height and roof height by measuring to the midpoint of a pitched roof or the top of a flat roof. Next, increase height for principal building to allow up to 3 stories of livable floor area above grade, and increase height for ADUs to allow for a 2-story of livable area. Next, increase building heights in commercial zones to be consistent with the infill housing in residential zones, which is up to 9-meter building heights. Lastly, on heights, create reference to a single story in the zoning bylaw. Next is impermeable surfaces. So define impermeable surface to limit the extent of all surfaces that do not permit groundwater infiltration, and introduce a maximum impermeable surface coverage by zone ranging from 40% in R1 and increasing incrementally to 60% in R5. Require consolidated live landscaping areas in small lot zones to support soil volumes for trees and other plantings. Update the definition for rear yard to clarify the application of paved coverage, and streamline coverage for accessory structures to improve consistency across residential zones. Allow lot coverage for accessory structures in small lots to be in addition to lot coverage for principal buildings and accessory buildings, rather than including within total lot coverage. The garage siting is to minimize floor area exemptions to prioritize space for living as opposed to space for parking, and simplify the regulation and improve design flexibility by removing the floor area exemptions and lot coverage transfer provision, and apply the floor area exemptions to only 1 dwelling unit as opposed to up to 4. Next, strengthen the siting requirements by siting garages and carports in R1 through R4 zones at the side of a principal building or ADU, or in the rear of a property, including within an ADU, and in the R5 zones permitting the attached garages or carports at the front of a building. And lastly, minimize the appearance of parking and garage doors from the streetscape by limiting garage doors to no more than 60% of the width of the front face of a principal building, and regulating the number of contiguous parking spaces or garage doors. Private open space. Broaden the application of floor area exemptions for verandas and decks to all infill units in residential zones, and ensure private open space for secondary suites and ADUs of at least 20 meters squared to provide access to outdoor space. There's 3 recommendations related to privacy and outlook. As a second-story setback has little to no design benefits, increases the cost of construction, and results in a less energy-efficient building envelope, it is recommended that it be removed from the zoning bylaw. And to reduce overlook from ADUs by regulating window and deck placements and/or screening along the side and rear lots lines in the small lot zones. Dormers. Define dormers and regulate dormers separately from building height and roof forms to improve design flexibility. And regulate dormers through the placement and size to mitigate overly large roof masses. There are 3 recommendations related to basements. First, streamlining the floor area exemption for basement ceiling heights of up to 1.3 meters above ground in all residential zones to enable and encourage living space with the access to daylight. Discourage basements in ADUs to protect tree roots and minimize ground disturbance by allowing for 2 stories above ground. And lastly, enable access to daylight by requiring a minimum finished ceiling height for the lowest level of a building as 1.1 meters above grade. This would also reduce the need for blasting, the use of energy-intensive materials, and reduce hydrological impacts. For driveway access, maintain existing access limits to no more than 1 driveway access for residential zone parcels where frontage is less than 30.5 meters. Extend driveway access provisions for townhouses to all attached housing forms, but not where detached housing forms are less likely to result in compact driveways. And last for this section, setbacks. To reduce setbacks for ADUs such as overlook and overshadowing on neighbors, it is recommended to increase setbacks from the rear, interior side, exterior side lot line in large lot zones. Based on the evaluation criteria listed on the slide here, there are 22 recommendations for future actions, and they are outlined in the staff report in Table 3. Each recommendation is supported in greater detail in the report, and we will outline them quickly here. There are 11 recommendations related to tree protection that are recommended for future action. Diamond Head Consulting was engaged to review the district's current tree protection regulations and provide recommendations to enhance tree planting and protection. So include soil volume targets through bylaw with a specific density of retained or newly planted trees and corresponding minimum soil volumes to achieve the canopy cover targets and canopy credits. Increase siting flexibility by increasing side setbacks to reduce conflicts with neighboring trees, or alternatively enable minor variances to side setbacks by allowing smaller setbacks on one side of a building where a protected tree is situated on the other side. Limit tree impacts from basements by enabling height allowances to achieve 3 stories above ground in principal buildings and 2 stories above ground in an accessory dwelling unit. And considering approaches to access and minimize parking and driveway impacts, including enabling staff delegated authority, retention of existing building and driveway footprints at the time of redevelopment, and encouraging lane access. Next, extending and holding of landscape and security for canopy cover targets, target trees past occupancy for a period of up to 3 years. Next, improve conditions for green infrastructure and rights-of-way to ensure adequate soil volumes and canopy area at the time of road improvement works. And consideration for broadening the list of significant trees to ensure all high-value trees are prioritized for protection at time of development. and enable delegation of minor variances to setbacks, building heights, and parking to improve protection of high-value trees. Lastly, incentivize sustainability by developing a sustainability checklist, reducing permitting or future stormwater utility tax in exchange for planting and maintaining trees. For the section on retention of homes, there are 9 recommendations related to those. Establish a process for retaining homes and conversions either through the zoning bylaw or an associated policy for reviewing and approach applications. Continue to use HRAs to negotiate density for new designated heritage properties, and review financial incentives, which could include development-free structures, fast-tracking, DCC permissive tax exemptions, and heritage grants. Consider delegating minor variances for when homes are retained, and which could include relaxations to heights and setbacks. And lastly, transfer development rights or densities from heritage properties or properties where an existing home is retained. Last 2 here. So related to height, removing the limit on the number of stories that would enable up to 3 stories above grade and an additional story within a basement where ceilings are no higher than 1 to 1.3 meters above grade. In this scenario, the 3rd story would be partially contained within the roof structure. And one related to owner occupancy, remove owner occupancy requirement for secondary suites as it restricts tenure, regulates people rather than uses, and impacts flexibility. Here we've just recapped the staff recommendations, and the last slide here is just opening up for discussion on this, and the team is here to respond to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ms. Ramel. Okay, so we're going to come to this table. I think that there's a long list of things for us to consider tonight from the report, so I think if we So I'm thinking that perhaps what we might do from a meeting management perspective, and if everybody's comfortable with this, is we might go around the table and briefly speak to what you're comfortable tackling tonight, if anything. And I just want you to kind of focus on what our original ask was for, would like the tree protection, permeable and impermeable site coverage, and driveway widths, for example. And so perhaps we can maybe go around the table first and do something like that, and maybe I'll start with you, Mayor Murdoch, if you're okay with that.
Sure, I would, yeah, I guess I'm looking at this, there's a lot in this report, and I guess, you know, we just passed significant changes to bylaws in June. Yeah, and I'm just, you know, I'm certainly looking forward to feedback from staff about what is and isn't working. I know that's something, as we're getting applications, we're probably getting some feedback on that as to as changes that might come with that. So this came back to me. I was a little bit surprised to see the level of change contemplated within this, but I understand the rationale for putting it in front of us. I mean, today I think, you know, maybe some broad discussion on some of the zoning change models. Yeah, I think, you know, if I look at the 4 key areas that were sort of flagged there, the tree protection, retention of existing homes, permeable site coverage, and driveway widths, those were things I think that I think are probably worth chatting about tonight, maybe moving forward. In terms of the siting and massing stuff, I have less, I think that may be a little much for a few reasons. I mean, if the changes are implemented as presented, you know, it would put a lot of the buildings, if not all of them, into certainly a large number into legal non-conforming status, which would then require zoning. I'm thinking of things like the minimal floor height models piece of that. They do impact every house in Oak Bay, which, you know, to my mind is, if you're changing zoning on every house in Oak Bay, you should have commensurate, you know, public consultation. So I'm not sure what exactly is contemplated in terms of consultation with these changes, but it sounds like the suggestion is we might just move them forward for bylaw changes, which is, would have, you know, public hearing and stuff, but not necessarily consultation. Obviously, they're also very interrelated. I think we can all acknowledge that, right? The changing the heights and the roofs and everything else have to be done concurrently, so that does take a lot of thought on that. I know that work's been done on this one, but I think that piece of it. Yeah, I think if we're going to get through this meeting tonight, I probably would prefer that we focus our time on the sort of the four key areas. I did, in the report, I'm still a little confused as to, I think we were talking about these things back, and my recollection of this was, tackling some of these things like permeability and retention of older homes as sort of being critical things. I know we also talked about hoping to get to things like townhomes and corner lot factors, because I think those are housing types that we were hoping to see move forward in the near future. So those are kind of areas I was kind of hoping to see, and I can't remember see if I can find on the staff report the language that was in here. I mean, yeah, the report at that meeting in July of this year, when we were looking at possible additional changes and things, at that time, council directed that no further form and character review be removed from the work plan for this zoning bylaw. So I was confused to see this, because I get the rationale first. It still comes under these pieces, but it seems like almost everything in here is related to size and massing, and which affects the form and character, but not. So anyway, those are sort of I think it's good to have a discussion tonight, but just looking at the amount of time required and then the sheer number of things, like how many hours it took me to go through this and sort of cross-correlate, I struggle with seeing how we can get too deep into the actual, the massing design pieces, although I think hearing from people where they're sitting would probably be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you. I come to this with my council hat and my architect hat on. I was very excited to see this report. Read it through quite carefully, and I'm prepared to go ahead with all of the recommendations. I thought they were all completely thoughtful as far as having foresight as to issues that would come forward with the bylaws currently as they stand, and addressed important issues such as accessibility, quality of design. I had a few questions. I don't know if this would be the time to ask them, but I had a few clarifying questions. But was hoping actually to move forward, basically the staff recommendation to go ahead with the this first stage of immediate actions, and just to look forward to how quickly we could get to the future actions.
Thanks. I think we'll save the questions for after we've heard from everyone around the table, if that's all right. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I was a little surprised to see this come back to this meeting in so extensively. We adopted the new bylaw not too long ago, and we haven't delivered much on it, so it's very difficult to have opinions and particularly to get any feedback from the community on experiences and whatnot. So I am not as eager to go forward with amending a bylaw that has just been so recently adopted. Certainly things like the things that affected climate change, like the tree protection, and retention of homes, those types of things I thought were worthy of discussion. And the impermeable surfaces, because I think that's something that I get questioned about, and I think it's of interest to the community as well as driveway access. So I think there are things like that I would consider revisiting, but the list is so extensive that we would be reanalyzing and perhaps amending a bylaw before we have even viewed the impact of what was so recently adopted. So that's my take on it. I think also in looking at another item that is on the agenda tonight, there hasn't been a real coordination and synchronization of some of these services. And so what I'm not understanding right now is as we as we develop new housing and as we increase population, if we have an understanding of the services that we have to offer now, and I'm thinking certainly public works, because that's on the agenda, but emergency services, and how they will tie into all of this and what will have to be done in those areas. So there's bigger pieces yet that I think still also have to be connected to this, that I would like to have a sense of where we're going and how we are going to analyze those before we amend all of these.
Thank you so much. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report through you, Chair, to Ms. Rimmel. I too am feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this. This is a high-density report, in fact. But what I agree that we haven't really tested the bylaw that we just altered in or revised in the summertime. That has not been tested. I'm also aware that there is some anxiety in the community about how quickly we're moving or not on housing, but the anxiety is around what housing will look like, what density will look like, what will the impacts be. And we just received a report on infrastructure not that long ago. I'm concerned about that and concerned about how we accommodate some of the density given the state of the infrastructure. How are we going to do all of that? How are we going to finance all of that? So I really feel, I almost feel like this report deserves a workshop with council and a real in-depth discussion. I'm not sure we can do it in the format of a meeting, or we could do it in a special meeting, but I think it's something that the community needs to be a part of as well. And I don't know what is planned for the engagement piece, but I know that a number of neighborhoods are concerned. They're concerned about the combination of active transportation changes on their streets, parking. So there are many things at play here. And I would like a chance at least to get some feedback from the community, but also I would like a chance to be able to sort of chunk these many topics that required much further discussion. But thank you very much for a very comprehensive report.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. First of all, I just wanted to ask if the mayor could repeat his suggestion for which parts of this might be looked at constructively this evening. You said 4 things, and I wasn't quick enough to write them down.
Well, there's suggested in the short term, the 4 topics that were highlighted in the report were that we gave direction to come back with were tree protection, retention of existing homes, permeable site coverage, and driveway widths.
And
there
then
was a
form
5th.
character out.
And the form and character was sort of
Gotcha.
the 5th,
Okay.
which sort of addressed all the massing. There's no actual retention of existing home items within this, within the short term.
In the short term.
If you look at the list, so it's really just the tree protection, permeable site coverage, and driveway widths that are left within that framework. And again, that's just my take of it. I think there may be also some good discussion around ADUs, because personally, I think we're going to see some issues around those coming up soon, and maybe we can have a conversation about that. But if we're just, that's what I said.
I'm not sure I have a really clear answer about what we should do tonight, but I do feel like, just in response to the conversation we're having, that what we adopted in June, it was a lot of work to get there, but it really was just the bare minimum framework. And I think that to be able to deal at a finer grained level with the scheme, as earlier rather than later, on some things that we probably do feel quite strongly or passionately about, that we should do that. So I wouldn't want to put that off. And there are certainly some environmental values. If you leave things too long and you get negative consequences around things like driveway access, and then you get kind of a bad rap for your bylaw, that you don't want to be there either. So I am happy to move some of this stuff forward tonight if we can. Those items that you've just listed, Mayor, that would be satisfactory to me. I do think we could do others, but I do agree that it's probably too much for one evening. So while I love Councillor Smart's proactive approach there, I do actually love the proactive approach. I think it may still be too much, because I think there are some probably interaction effects by some of those things that are suggested that we really won't quite understand that just in this room tonight in an hour or two. So, and I had quite a few questions actually, which even just doing that would take up a lot of time. So, anyway, that's my piece so far.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Appleton.
Well, thank you, Chair. I guess I take, not a slightly different tack on this, but I really focus in on some specific language that was used in the staff report, which I very much agree with. And it's the language that's used at the top of page 4. And it talks specifically about infill housing representing one component of the district's housing need, but then goes on to talk about, several other levers that the district will need to action to be able to really effectively meet housing targets. And in as much as infill housing, especially in this context, has been a ton of work up front and very complex to implement and had to be done on a very short timeline with respect to responding to provincial legislation. It is the immediate rollout and impact. We've just received a report on housing, essentially housing applications and where we're sitting at with our housing targets. The number of SSMUH applications is not extraordinary at this stage of the game. This is not, in my view, where a large amount of the ground in housing is going to be made up. So I am of the mind that with a finite amount of staff capacity in community building and planning, that exactly these components that are mentioned in the staff report, OCP review that includes things like spot zoning or not spot zoning, excuse me, but pre-zoning for certain types of housing types as staff have outlined for us. And the other pieces, council priority projects that building and planning needs to work on. I would like to see building and planning's capacity going there. All that to say, with respect to this report, staff have provided us with a summary of recommendations, ones that can be actioned within, within staff capacity, but ones that are easy to action and will allow us to move forward. I'm completely satisfied moving the staff recommendation for the Table 1 priority actions at this stage of the game so that we have the capacity to work on the other components of housing. I think we and staff could spend, as we've described here, quite a bit of time looking at the every fine-grained detail of every recommendation in this report. I have never seen the infill housing program and the bylaws associated with it as etched in stone in any way. I think we do need to roll it out. I think we need to see some implementation. I think we need to see some feedback as the program rolls out. And then if we need to provide some changes and some in-stream modifications to it, we can do so at that time. And then for the larger scale, I'm definitely still interested in the things which are on the longer list, the Table 2 actions for consideration. Staff have proposed in this recommendation that those things be put into a project backgrounders 2025 council consideration priority process. We're going to be looking at those within a couple of months. So we will have the opportunity to discuss how we want to action those, how we want to direct staff to action those in fairly short order. So all this to say is, I think we have some large-scale initiatives, some large-scale work, and some heavy-duty work that we need to do on housing overall. We could spend a lot of time looking at the fine details of this report. I'm satisfied with what staff have given us. I'd like to see us action it, move on, give it a try, roll it out in the community, and then address the other ones as part of council priorities. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Appleton. Yeah, I think I'm kind of leaning towards, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Chair Braithwaite, and through you to Council. I just want to clear up what might have been a misunderstanding of the staff report option. If Council were to ask for the Table 2 items to come back in a project backgrounder, that would be in December of 2025. It would come back for the 2025 review, so the ones coming up now are the 2024. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think I'm kind of leaning towards what Councillor Watson said in regards to looking at some of these items and moving forward with some of it tonight, but perhaps taking a longer look at some of the other items. So I know that some of you have questions, so I think I will go to questions next from around this table. If there's anyone who would like to ask specific questions on any aspects of the report, unless someone has a suggestion about moving forward in some other way. Mr. Smart.
Yeah, thank you. I would love an opportunity to ask questions. As far as process, I will just mention that I'd prefer to do an exclusionary approach if there's certain things people aren't comfortable with. I'd be more comfortable with an exclusionary approach so that we could move as much of this forward as possible. My first question through you, Chair, is with the one height recommendation that is suggested to be pushed to the future scope of work, and that would be recommendation number 5, which is with regards to the 3-story definition, which I saw as a recommendation that would really tackle the issue of both a lot of heritage houses that have higher basements, but also being able to build a 2-story house with a secondary suite that is a little bit closer to grade for creating accessible suites. So my question was, what was the reason for the number 5 recommendation, which was an option under the height recommendations, the one that was excluded from being an immediate height recommendation? Why was it suggested to be pushed to a future work phase? I wasn't sure why it was that complicated, and I'm sure staff has some information to share. Thank you.
Not sure who would like to take this question, if it's one of our staff or Ms. Elmore. Ms. Elmore.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Through the chair, to address that question, we saw an opportunity, should the height limit of infill buildings be increased to allow 3 stories above grade, and therefore grant greater flexibility in configuring floor area within 3-story infill buildings. We see an opportunity to also allow livable basements to have daylight at a higher level and push the topmost story partially into the attic. And Ms. Rimmel has a photo that we used in the recommendations report, and it is indeed a heritage or character home, showing how that 3 stories plus basement can be beautifully achieved and not result in an overly large massing. But we also felt that this item did hinge on greater heights and potentially greater massing and requires greater conversation and discussion. So we included it as an option. Thank you, Ms. Rimmel.
Thank you, Director Bull.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to add and maybe clarify that right now the program has we opted in June to limit the size of houses to 3 stories. And so this would allow for a 4th floor in the house. And the reason it landed up in the second category is that we believe that's a significant change that probably needs to be evaluated later, perhaps when there's more results, because it is a departure from current 1- and 2-story form that's probably more dominant. So thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, Councillor Smart?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
My next question through you, Chair, was with regards to the impermeable paving category. I wondered if the scope does include potentially allowing permeable driveways to extend over the municipal right-of-way, and revising that engineering bylaw that now does not allow for you to have an impermeable driveway over the municipal right-of-way. And I just bring this up because it's what often tips the balance of a project going ahead and having a driveway that isn't hard surface. It is the fact that half of the driveway, as soon as it hits municipal land, has to go under certain requirements of compressed gravel screenings. So I'm just wondering if that in 2.8 there, does that include updating the boulevard bylaw? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're going to ask Mr. Rennick to come forward to answer this question. Welcome, Mr. Rennick.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, We do not understand that the direction around impermeable surface changes extends to driveways on the boulevard. Further, I would caution making changes to the specifications for driveways on the boulevard, simply that we often find that the permeable pavers require additional maintenance, and because this is district-owned property, I would just caution council that it may put more of a maintenance obligation onto district-owned property. And so if that is council's direction, I would ask that we be given the opportunity to do a little bit of analysis and bring something back for council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rennick. Any other questions, Councillor Smart?
Yes, thank you. I do have just two more questions. Through you, Chair. So with regards to the recommendations under it's 2.4.3 with regards to basements, I'm wondering when there's recommendations that are in this report that use the words sort of to consider instead of, you know, recommended. I'm wondering, would these types of recommendations, if we did move them forward tonight, would that mean that that item would come back to council or be reviewed by advisory design panel, or that staff would simply consider it within the staff purview? So I'm just wondering and one example was in 2.4.3 that it had the words to consider, but there are other recommendations in the report that also use that wording, and I just wanted to know, I guess, and I think council would be interested to know, does that mean we have another touch point, or that staff would be making that decision? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Elmore.
Thank you. Through the chair, the language used in this report is simply as a consultant, providing information to staff as well as to mayor and council. We wouldn't presume to direct what the outcome should be. And with that, I would turn it over to Mr. Boole.
Director Boole.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, yeah, we would probably gravitate to the suggested wording there and double check with whatever other changes we are going to make in the bylaw, if so directed, if that all adds up, because this particular one has some relations to the tweaks that are proposed to height as well, so they have to go in tandem. So depending on the collection of changes that are made, we will try to, and also work with our consultant to make sure that we coordinate those changes carefully, then come up with a recommended number though. So it would come back to council. To your question about a further touch point, it would come back in the form of a proposed bylaw amendment in that case. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to staff, then I understand the process. I just wanted to confirm that the process then is that if we move forward some or all of the immediate actions tonight, there would be another point in which that amended bylaw would come back and we would have a chance to further consider the details at that point.
Mr. Boole.
Through the chair, yes, that's a correct understanding.
Thank you. Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you. Just one more question through you, Chair. I was just wondering if staff would recommend if there's things that we do not move forward tonight, but move to future action category, and the ones that are in the future action category, I see a lot of that scope as having potential benefit to be reviewed either by the Heritage Commission or the Advisory Design Panel. And I'm wondering if staff would recommend that we would make such direction tonight, or potentially would it be more preferential to wait until we have our council priority session and really consider the timing in which that next phase is going to happen, and that those referrals would be better to happen at a later date? Thank you.
Director Boole.
Thank you, Chair, through you. It depends a bit on what category of changes we're talking about. If those, I think the question is about future changes that would come back to you for a project background or to be considered next year. In that case, I would suggest to hold off on any review until that backgrounder comes back and determine the desired consultation or process at that time. if we're talking about the changes that you might ask for today to come back, then there's another opportunity there to consider referring matters to advisory bodies as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Smart. Councillor Watson and then Green. Oh, no. Councillor Watson, then
Thank you very much. I do have a few questions, some maybe for Ms. Elmore and some for staff. I just wanted to, and I'm going to use the report numbering, I just wanted to ask a question about the recommendation with respect to setbacks for larger lots. And just to understand the rationale a bit more, my reflection on looking at that was, why would that this might actually impede some of the other objectives that are laid out in other recommendations, such as allowing for better consolidation of soil volumes, desire to keep open space for a healthy tree canopy, and also the ability to retain usable green space for the residents of ADUs and secondary suites, and this idea of having more private open space for tenants on the lot, and also the fact that there's a suggestion that ADUs not have windows next to the property line. So why, if you could just explain the rationale again for suggesting that we would need larger setbacks just because it's a larger lot?
Thank you. Through the chair, these recommendations really came from a sober second look at the provincial site standards, which were fairly closely followed in the bylaw amendment in June. These are quite large lots. This, on average, in the R1, R2, R3, and by allowing detached units to disperse so much on a lot, they could encroach quite closely on neighbors and streetscapes. And we gave this recommendation as a way of pulling those potential homes back a bit from neighboring properties and from the street, while still allowing quite a bit of flexibility in siting. One of the additional benefits of this approach would be to give more space to boulevard trees or trees planted in front and side and rear yards. Thank you.
Thank you. I also wondered if you could, I had difficulty understanding the garage siting analysis and recommendations. I felt I really needed a picture to understand what was going on there, but I just wondered, without a picture, if you could, Ms. Elmore, kind of in your own words, maybe not quite the words that are in the report, walk us through what it is you're really trying to achieve here, because I didn't understand what was proposed.
Thank you. Ms. Elmore?
Thank you. Through the chair, this section in the general regulations of the zoning bylaw was questioned in council meetings in May and June. And it's true, they're very complicated and convoluted. So these are sections 4.2.12, 4.6.11. So we did workshop this, and I understand that a diagram or an illustration might have been helpful at providing clarity on these regulations. We did workshop these regulations with the urban designer we've been working with and the architectural consultant we've been working with, and distilled these sections down to what we believe are the essence of the intent, and that is the siting of garage doors and carport entrances from the streetscape. It is nested with floor area exemptions under one of the provisions, and a transfer of lot coverage under the other. Where we felt the benefit was in regulating or encouraging the siting of garages to be less prominent from the streetscape, and parking being one of the more contentious issues that we discussed in the spring. We felt it was worthwhile to maintain those siting provisions, but remove the unnecessary goodies from that. The goodies being the floor area exemption and the floor area transfer. So there's a lot bundled in there, and I apologize if I'm taking too much airspace. The siting, the importance of the distinction in the siting is that in the larger lot zones, the zoning bylaw provides a trade-off where garages are sited either on the side, and that's that clause about being sited at 85 to 90 degrees from the front property, or from the front property line. Or the second part being that the garage be sited entirely in the rear yard. And those are the provisions for the larger lot zones, the R1, R2, R3. And then there's also a provision in the smaller lot zones that there's a slight distinction where the goodies are given where the garage or carport is sited, so that's either at a side entrance to the front property line or where the garages are recessed from the building. So I'm going to pause. There's more to this, but I want to pause because it is quite a mouthful and I'd like to know if this is making sense.
Sir Watson?
I have to say, no, not entirely. I really need I would need some diagrams to understand this. And I guess when I looked at it and I thought, I really don't understand this. And I do know that there are some good examples that are out there in our community right now that may not actually fit these provisions. And I wouldn't want to prohibit something that we already allow now that actually can work in practice. So, yeah, I appreciate how complex the interweaving of all these parts, but I would find it really difficult to move forward on this particular item at this point in time without really understanding what's being proposed. So maybe I would say perhaps no need to ask you to continue the explanation anymore. I do have one other clarification too, and it may fall into the same category, which is the driveway access requirements for townhouses and how they differ from those of just a regular home, because that's also discussed and I didn't follow it very well. But it may be in the same category as garages on larger lots.
Thanks so much. We'll go to Mr. Graham for this.
So regarding the driveway access bylaw, so currently the driveway access bylaw, well, first of all, it's not been amended since June the 24th. And so within that driveway access bylaw, it still refers to RS zones, one family zones. Obviously, there is no one family zones now within Oak Bay. They're essentially multi-family zones that allow up to 4 units per lot. And so when you then apply a 4-unit development, you then basically in the bylaw you refer to other zones are now referred to. You don't just default to say, well, the bylaw hasn't been amended. It's obviously still intending to apply to the new R zones while it refers to the RS zones. So essentially that bylaw needs to be updated to look at driveway accesses to lots that now allow up to 4 units per lot. And perhaps I will default also to Director of Engineering, Mr. Rennick.
Mr. Rennick.
Thank you, Chair. There is a provision in the current driveway access bylaw that allows townhouse forms to each have individual driveway accesses. For example, there is a townhouse development immediately adjacent to us on Granite Street where each of the townhouses has its own driveway access. The way that the driveway access bylaw defines townhome, one could argue that any attached dwelling of at least 2 dwelling units, so a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, would also be considered a townhome. And so that was one of the issues that was surfaced through the consultant review, is whether that's something that council is interested in, or essentially that was one of the high priority issues that was raised.
Thank you, Mr. Rennick.
And thank you. That's everything for me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else have questions? Mayor Murdoch and then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to keep my questions primarily focused on the areas that I had, but just under 2.2.3, it refers to increasing maximum height for principal buildings. That's not a term that exists in our bylaw. I'm just curious if that's intention is increase the, and there's no limit on roof height being proposed. Was that just referring to building height? Was that increasing the building height to 9 meters?
Ms. Elmore.
Thank you. Through the chair, that is a recommendation that would be coupled with clarifying and simplifying the definition for building height, and then adding in a limit for the overall ridge height.
Okay, so separate from the building height, a new definition includes ridge height. As I understand
Correct.
what you said. Okay, thank you. I just wouldn't mind just a little discussion around the maximum height and for accessory dwelling units. And just there's a number of items here for ADUs that I generally agree with. And I just wonder if there's other things that we could look at in terms of structure. So I think, having the maximum height language here, but I guess that's the same piece there, whether it's roof height or others, to encourage the, development without basement. So is that suggestion then to get the 2 stories, you would not be eligible for a basement under that criteria?
Ms. Elmore?
Through the chair, that is why the recommendation is phrased the way it is, yes.
Okay. And then I'm just wondering if there's other mechanisms by which there's mention of sort of, obscured windows and so forth. I'm assuming clerestory windows would probably fit into the category of windows that would be acceptable on side lot or rear lot overlooks. But are there other mechanisms there by which to encourage, living space like patios and so forth to also face inwards into the lot?
Ms. Elmore?
Through the chair, if directed to address form and character, there are strategies that can get at the overlook and the placement of windows and semi-private open space, yes.
Thank you.
Okay,
Mayor
thank
Murdoch?
you. Under 2.4.1, the streamline for floor area exemption criteria. This is suggestion of exemption for basement ceiling heights for 1.3 meters above ground in all residential zones. I just note that 10 years ago when the revisions came, there was 2 different categories, and particularly for older homes, there was exemptions up to 1.52 or partial exemptions above 1.22 up to 1.52 to encourage these older homes that do have higher out of the ground basements to be retained, and to avoid the situation where you have, again, legal non-conforming status. So is the intention, I just didn't see any mention in here of retaining any of those recognition of older homes and making sure that they retain their ability to keep their exemptions for some of these these basements.
Ms. Elmore?
Through the chair, thank you for pointing that out. I think that's an important point to make. Staff might have more to contribute on this, but I believe this recommendation is best served if it applies to new infill housing.
Anyone on
I don't know.
Anyone on staff? Yeah, Director Bull?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. I think the intent here is to simplify it because the provisions that are there between old and new do add complexity. But depending on the interest of council, we could further look into that. If it gets streamlined with new language, that it means that if any existing buildings are not quite fitting in that mold, so to say, they continue or they become non-conforming, they can continue to be used. Yeah, and so but the idea here is to and we haven't reviewed if the new provision would actually work well for that scenario or not, so that could be further reviewed, but definitely the intent is to remove some of the complexity of the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Murdoch.
I'll make a very brief comment. I appreciate that intent. I just think, I know when that review happened and that went through it, there was a lot of thought that went into making sure that we were encouraging the retention of those old homes, and that was really that was a lot of assessment of existing buildings to make sure that was provided. So I would, there's benefits of simplicity, but there's also benefits of catering the bylaws to what's a very complicated mixed development timeframe. Thank you. The other question was just the suggestion of having a minimum of first floor height to allow for more out of ground light. I'm just curious as to that recommendation. I understand the rationale for it, but if I look at what people are building right now, there's a lot of form that has level access. I'm assuming some of that's for accessibility reasons, some of it's just for aesthetics. So is the proposal for the requirement for the 1.3 meters out of ground to be? It sounds like it's going to be mandatory as a requirement for new builds. Is that the intention? I guess this is through you to Ms. Elmore.
Ms. Elmore?
Thank you. Through the chair, the recommendation is that would apply to essentially new infill homes with basements. Now, it needs to be considered again with the recommendations for height, where the recommendation would maintain the 3-story limit, or the limit on 3 stories, but the increase in height. So it would be unlikely that the 3rd story would be a basement.
Okay.
So it is, more likely that all 3 stories would be above ground stories rather than having a basement floor.
Sorry, you may have to just clarify that, because this is 1 basement plus 2 above ground stories. Is that, that's my understanding of what the way the wording is right now, because there's no suggestion of 3 above ground stories at this time according to the recommendations.
Ms. Elmore?
Through the chair, should the maximum height be increased to 9 meters above ground plus a roof structure of 2.5 meters, it would leave ample space for 3 livable stories above ground. And that would take the whole allocation for 3 stories and not leave a story for below grade living.
Okay, thank you.
Director Bowl, you have something to add?
Thank you. Our updated regulations do allow for 3 floors now above ground. We've seen some proposals coming in for that. So back to this language, it applies specifically to a scenario where there is a basement that is under grade, so to say. But however, it doesn't negate the option to start at grade and have that level access if that's the preference of the builder or the owner of the house. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. And just for my clarification, these are regulations for all buildings, whether they're multifamily or single family?
Ms. Elmore?
Through the chair, the recommendation for the height was targeting infill housing. So for 3 or more units. And I'm looking back at the language for basements right now. I believe our recommendation was to ensure basement living spaces have a minimum finished ceiling height of 1.1 meters above grade. It does sound like we need to take that back and reconsider whether that applies to infill housing and or all housing, and how we would address non-conforming uses, although Mr. Boole has proposed how we have regulated that in the past.
Thank you. I might just give just a little bit of background on the garage. Appreciate the simplification. That exemption, requiring it to be turned at 90 degrees or set back. In fact, historically, that was actually an error when it got written into the bylaw. So the recommendation out of the floor area changes, or the zoning changes in 2014, recommended that the garages be left in line with the building or behind, not a 1 meter setback. And the reason for that was that there's a lot of older homes that do have those garages in line with the front of the house. And so it removed the exemption for older homes, which was kind of problematic. So I think that just fixing that, I know that in the recommendation here is being left in as the 1 meter behind, but I would actually appreciate if we could resolve that. It was just a change that came in at a staff level, but it was in contradiction to the recommendations that came out of the process, and yeah, it was never reviewed in that sense. Other questions really here, I think. So the other struggle I have here was related specifically to the impermeable surfaces. So this is 2.8.2, where we're moving away from a percentage of lot, and by definition of what is impermeable surfaces, and coming up with a percentage. And I look at the diagram, particularly diagram D, and looking at the impermeable surfaces shown with a little tiny pocket of consolidated soil and a very large swath of paving from front to back of the lot. That doesn't seem to be in keeping with what we're trying to accomplish. And so I'm just wondering if that, again, where did that number 60% of impermeable coverage come from? And when we're looking at 35% for buildings, I guess that's really my question on that one. It just like that diagram is on the last example D, if you put it up on screen, shows the impermeable surface, second from the right. We're showing C right now, but perhaps we can move over to D on the screen. Oh, there's no D on there. And it's in the report.
It's in the report.
Anyway,
D's in the report.
perhaps you
yeah.
could just some explanation of that rationale for such a high percentage of impermeable surface would be helpful.
Ms. Elmore.
Thank you. Through the chair, we did some calculations that combined the lot coverage with the front and rear paved coverage, and then also added that to the live landscaping that has been adopted into the bylaw in order to make sure that those numbers worked in theory on a site, and then tested them through these diagrams. We did find that 60% impermeable surface in R5 does work in order to encompass the lot coverage, the paved front and rear paved surface coverages, and also allow for some additional paved elements such as patios or walkways that aren't otherwise restricted. Beyond that, we found that it works with the recommendation for the live landscaping, which in the R5 is 20%. Okay, what is illustrated, yeah, and what is regulated is 20%.
Right. Okay, thank you. Almost done my questions, my apologies here. Thank you. Yeah, I think that completes my questions. I think I would, if we get into actually moving some of the site massing things forward, and having that debate, I'll save my comments and questions for some of those. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and just like to go back to 2.6.3, ties into 2.6.2, 2.6.3, but where it has minimized overlook from elevated outdoor spaces, I just want to clarify, what constitutes an outdoor space, and so are the small balconies that you see on many homes, are those considered outdoor spaces also, or are they excluded from that definition?
Ms. Elmore.
Thank you. To confirm, we're looking at 2.6.3. Is that it? Minimize overlook from elevated
Correct.
outdoor spaces?
Yeah.
Thank you. Through the chair, really what this is getting at is rooftop decks. So in the case of a flat roof, where in a constrained infill situation where private outdoor space is put on the top of the building, that provides a view over the neighbors, and this recommendation came out of a sensitivity to that.
Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. And then on 2.10.2, ensure private open space for accessory dwelling units and secondary suites. While I appreciate the increased livability that would provide to some of those spaces, I guess there are some aspects like these, and even the impermeable surfaces in back spaces, that although they may be on the plans, they're very difficult, I think, to actually enforce on a go-forward basis. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to the viability of actually ensuring that private open space for accessory dwelling units and secondary suites is first defining that it. What do you mean by privacy? Do we mean a separated area with a fence or screened viewing area? And then how do those types of arrangements get monitored on a go-forward basis?
Thank you. Ms. Elmore.
Thank you. Through the chair, I might defer the second part of your question to staff in terms of enforcement after the building permit has been approved. Typically, this type of approach, which is used in many other jurisdictions, it can be somewhat regulated through the zoning bylaw in terms of what the private open space must contain or not contain, and how any size or screening requirements. They are also often guided through development permit guidelines, which will not be the case at this time. Enforcement of many building elements can certainly be a challenge once buildings are built and occupancy is given. However, staff might have further suggestions on how that is managed at the district.
Thanks, Ms. Elmore. Director Bull.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That would be addressed only at the building permit stage. So we would look for these items somewhere that there would need to be pinpointed. What is the private open space for each of the units? But that's the only time it would get checked, and it would get built through the building permitting process. By the time it's completed, it should be built to the plans. I think in terms of these kind of balconies and covered decks, there's some safety there, that because if changes were made down the road, say if the deck was enclosed after the fact, that does require a permit. So unless somebody proceeds without a permit, which does happen from time to time, but normally that would require a follow-up building permit, and then at that point the question would come up, well, where's the open space for this unit? If you're enclosing it, then you need to have replacement open space. So there's a bit of a process there for the building permit process, but indeed, as Ms. Elmer is saying, without form and character control, we're not really, we don't have a development permit in addition to that. So it would rely only on the building permit process to enforce that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson, anything else? Any other questions before I go to the public? Okay. Anyone from the public who would like to speak? I don't see anybody online, I don't think. So seeing no one there, I'll come back to this table. I think a motion to receive the report would be in order. Councillor Green, and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, so I'd be looking to this table for motions. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I would be willing to move option 1 in the report.
Second.
Okay, we have a mover and a seconder. Would you like to motivate?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate how rushed it was to get the first stage of this project of reviewing the bylaw done for the end of June, and take this as a very comprehensive look that the consultant has done in conjunction with staff, and as the consultant phrased it, a sober second thought of basically a collection of details that were caught to ensure that this project moves forward successfully. I don't see drastic changes to the intent of what we're doing here. I see a lot of housekeeping, and I see being able to move this forward as a way of kind of cleaning up where we're at, to actually free up a lot of staff time potentially from what are dozens of little things that are going to potentially be challenging as projects come in. We could potentially have, we don't know, 70 or 100. We're only speculating how many more units might get built if we let this important work that's just being done sit for a year or two. So I'd like to see this go ahead. I feel like this is going ahead with these recommendations puts us at a better starting place for the work we have ahead than what we currently have now. And yes, will revisions have to be made, but we're starting at a better point if we put these recommendations forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton, as the seconder, would you like to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I won't belabor that. I concur with those comments. I really think it's important. Staff have done a fair amount of work to summarize the recommendations and lay out for council what is doable within their current capacity and their work plan. It produces a very fine-grained and revised version of what council has debated over the course of the summer. Again, I also concur, revisions will be necessary in the future. This needs to be rolled out, trialed, and implemented, and get some feedback, some real-world feedback on the next steps of how this needs to be amended in the future. So I do not see it, again, as being immutable, that we will need to revisit in the future. I'm really interested in getting this moving and implemented so that building and planning's limited capacity can be applied to some of the other components of the housing strategy for the district that also need attention. So I'm just really keen to keep this moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Murdoch.
Thank you, Chair. I've been struggling a little bit about, I think it's appropriate to put the recommendation on the floor. So I've been debating whether or not to start, make resolutions to amend this. And I think I'm going to just not. I think I'm going to speak against the primary motion and make a suggestion that we maybe just direct some targeted changes on pieces. And I say that I do appreciate the sort of holistic look that's been taken. I think that's incredibly important. I know we've made an effort to do that in the last go around as well, to make sure that we were balancing out the pieces. What I do know, having gone through the really significant 18-month plus long process we went through the zoning review last time, with really a lot of consultation with builders and architects and the community, was that the small things really matter, and it feels like this, the recommendations here are totally in alignment with what other jurisdictions are doing. They make a lot of sense from a holistic approach, and they streamline the process from a staff perspective because they make things simpler. I'm looking at this more from a layperson's hat of what makes the community feel like Oak Bay and differentiates it, which I still believe has value, and those are things like, and they're quirky, but they are things like the way that we do manage things like building height, which may seem like an innocuous piece, but if you actually look at its effect on architectural design, the way we measure that in relation to roof heights, the second story setback, which if you walk down the street, the variated setbacks we have for buildings, what you get is a streetscape that has a lot of greenery, but has corridors of light and greenery between buildings. It has a minimized effective massing, so even large houses tend to have smaller effective massing because of the structure of the roofs. And a lot of these things, and I don't want to go through, again, I think this is better just to say, I would think we're better off voting this down, and then just, where I would like to see us move these forward, I think the accessory dwelling unit matters. I think I would like to see come back. I would like us to look at the permeability question, although I think probably with some, maybe not specific, but just some asks for some changes. I think that the recommendations are too high. But I think that it's too hard to go through here one by one and say, if we change this and not that. I think what's being presented as a holistic whole, it may well be worth us coming back to this if we find that the models are not working. But I looked at the models that we went through last time as trying to keep at least some semblance of relation to existing bylaws while adapting them to allow for larger size, smaller setbacks, and capacity to allow for the 4 housing units to be built. I'm not convinced yet that doesn't work. It may well need some more tweaks, but I just, at this point, this, to my mind in particular, is such a substantive change to the rhythm and the feel of the community that I would not feel comfortable with this without at least having a pretty substantial public input process on it. So that's where I'm fitting on this. I might ask the question, if this goes forward, the only public consultation I would see with this is public hearing. Is there contemplation of a more robust community engagement strategy attached to this, or is this, maybe through you, Chair, maybe just outside of staff? If the resolution is put forward here passes, does it include a public consultation process?
Director Bull.
Through you, Chair, a public consultation process was not anticipated or planned for these changes. So, and even the public hearing would need to check. We haven't reviewed it in detail if this falls in the category that you can have a public hearing. So if that's important to council, then we need to think about a different approach to take if that's important for the type of changes. or limit the changes to things that are comfortably dealt with through a quicker process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I'll just resolve it. I think that is a critical. I don't want to bog things down for no reason with public consultation, but I do think that these are the kind of areas that we get valuable feedback on, and we got it in the last process. Yeah, I think my preference here is to defeat this primary motion and come back in with a secondary motion to move some of the things like ADUs forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
Thank you, and thank you for the motion. I understand the intent behind it fully, but I also agree with the mayor that that Oak Bay does care about what it looks like. It does care about the aesthetics. It does care about its neighborhoods, its streetscapes. And there are a lot of things that our community cares about. And I think I have to be honest, this was a highly technical, granular report, which I appreciate is necessary given the content. But I don't have a full understanding of what all of these changes would look like. I don't, just based on tonight. So I feel it does require more consideration. And I do agree that our community cares about the future of its neighborhoods. We only have to look at the Carnarvon reaction. We've had other neighborhoods. We had a 900-person delegation and petition on that issue. We have other neighborhoods asking to meet with us because they're concerned about issues like parking and setbacks and all of those things. So I think we need robust community engagement at some stage. I don't think a public hearing is sufficient. And I think we have to get this right. So I will support deferring, and I will not support the current motion on the floor, but I would support a second motion that would, that I think the mayor articulated. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the comments by Councillor Smart and Councillor Appleton in wanting to move ahead with this, and I think just looking at it the way it is, although some things I do feel like I actually need a diagram to have my own clarity on it, and so I think that the community may feel the same way. My greatest concern is the impermeable surfacing, because that's one that right now, certainly around the area I'm in, is one that is causing the most problems now and the most concern going forward. And if Oak Bay has always prided itself on being a green community, and I think that this is an area that is quite concerning. Fine to say this is what we will do on the building permit, but then policing that, enforcing it on a go-forward basis so that we don't end up with so many of the situations you see in communities, and including this community, where there is surface that goes in when the permit is taken, and then what transpires as time moves along. And so I would like to understand better how we will approach it, what the community will the feedback we'll get from the community initially on what we are going to do, particularly on some of the smaller lots, and then really how we are going to manage it in the future. So I won't support the motion as it is presented.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to say anything? No. Actually, I'll speak first. I'm siding with Councillor Patterson Green and the mayor on this. I think there's some things on this list that I honestly cannot get behind, which is one of them would be removal of the second-story setback requirement. I feel that that's something that we have discussed, we have voted on, and I think it's important, as the mayor pointed out, within our community. So I won't be supporting the motion either. So, and I will go to second-time speakers very briefly. Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak one more time. I just wanted to address some of the comments around the table with regards to going out for extensive public consultation on this issue. And I just wanted to take a moment to express, in my review of this document, these are very granular changes. A lot of these are definition changes. This is not a fundamentally different approach than what we have already approved. I really see this more as a housekeeping, and I appreciate hearing around the table from other councillors the discomfort with not being able to visualize these things, and I can understand that discomfort, and I guess what I would see is a much more appropriate response, should this motion fail, that we really look at sending this to the ADP and coming back with recommendations that have been reviewed from those who are experts in this field, rather than the public. If around this table, councillors are having trouble visualizing and understanding this, I don't see that there's going to, for this level of housekeeping, be productive to go out to the public without a huge new project that would have to come forward, and I just don't see that the scale of changes reflect that.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton, for the second time.
Thank you, Chair. I would just request, in response to some of the comments made around the council table, I would request that if the motion on the floor fails and that if a subsequent motion is made to take an alternative course of action, I would request that such motion includes specific language about the timing for response, what information specifically detailing what information is lacking from the report that needs clarification, and that if it includes a component of public outreach and engagement of whatever scope, that be specifically defined, that be specifically outlined in terms of scope, and that staff be given an opportunity to provide feedback on what the cost and resource implications of that would be. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call the question on the motion. All in favor? Councillor Smart, Appleton, and Watson in favor. All opposed? Councillor Patterson, Mayor Murdoch, Councillor Green, and Councillor Braithwaite opposed. So I would look for other motions. I think, Mayor, you probably had some. Okay.
Oh, thank you. I would put a different motion on the table, but I don't know if that's in order for me versus anybody else. So I leave that to the chair to decide. But if I'd be willing to put a motion forward if it's appropriate for me to do forward.
A motion is always appropriate, so if you would like to try, go ahead.
I would like to put a motion forward to refer this report, specifically Table 2 immediate actions, to the advisory design panel for review.
Okay, I'm not seeing a seconder on that, so I will, oh, sorry, Councillor Watson will second, okay, if you'd like to motivate.
Thank you. Just hearing around the table that there's a gap here in understanding the implications of some of these things. I think our best resource is our advisory design panel to do a thorough look through these and come back to council with their thoughts. Thank you.
Councillor Watson, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I will add. I just want to reinforce the point that Councillor Smart made about the granularity, the fine detail, and the fact that I too think that sending out this, the general public are not the right folks to comment, I don't think, because it is complex and fine-grained. And I do think that a lot of these are quite small things that will simplify immediately application processes and even what needs to be submitted. Just for example, the building height stuff, I don't really see any problem with that at all. I think it'll be pretty insignificant, and it just makes for a lot easier understanding of actually what is allowed. So I think the ADP, for getting down to the fine detail and giving us their thoughts, would be a very useful place to start.
Thank you. I mean, I think that there's some of this, I'm not sure if it is all granular. To me, there's some of the things in here that are not granular whatsoever. And I'm wondering whether this motion precludes us from then putting forward some of the things that, as the mayor was talking about before, that we could put forward tonight. So I'll pass it over to the mayor now.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just speaking against the motion, I don't think that this is the right stage, and I take Councillor Appleton's point. At the end of the day, we do have limited time and place to spend our time and energy on. If we're not going to look at the broader piece of this right now, and I think that's appropriate. I think we should look at some of these that we can do, that may be some low-hanging fruit that will help, especially some of the new forms like the accessory dwelling units, and some of the permeability questions. I think we can move those forward and get those to bylaw and make those changes. So that'd be my preferred approach rather than sending the entirety to a design panel. And I do think that we want to just, again, use the time. We have a limited amount by the end of next year to change our OCP, and where we're going to move the needle on housing is in multifamily, and we need to go through an OCP process to have that conversation. We've already laid the groundwork for allowing this small-scale multi-unit housing. It's in place currently. Where we're going to meet, where we can make the difference now is in the multifamily. So I think that's the critical piece, and I want to make sure that we're not spinning around on these pieces for now. Just let's get on with the OCP piece. And again, I think by the time we're through that process, middle of next year, we'll have a better sense of where things are sitting on these. I would just say as well, I disagreed. I mean, that's okay with the comments that these are minor. There are some that are minor, but there are some that are major. And I think cumulatively, they're quite substantial to the point where I think people would look at what would be allowed under this and what's allowed currently, and certainly what was allowed 6 months ago, and not, and see a pretty substantive difference. And so I just, that's my own personal opinion. I do think that it's true that they're made up of a sequence of relatively minor. The cumulative effect would be quite substantial in terms of what could be built. So, yeah, so I'm not going to support the motion as it is. I do think we should defeat that and come back and move some of these things forward more expeditiously.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Patterson.
Yes, I will not support the motion as presented. I recognize what they're saying, that there are those with expertise on the design panel, and I agree with that. At the same time, I think that we as a council do have a role in being able to communicate these things to the residents in Oak Bay, and if we are not able to do that, I don't think it will suffice to say we're taking away that any input you might have to turn it over to the professionals because you will not understand this. So I think we have to be very careful how we speak about this. I think there are some things on here that we can move forward immediately and that they will streamline some of the work. But I think there are some pieces that are a little more concerning, and we would be better served, and the community will be better served just to take our time and do that right. Because if we try to rush it all through and people do not have any voice in it, I think the pushback will be intense. And so whether we appreciate our role or not, it still is up to us as a council to be able to communicate what we're doing to the community.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate everyone's comments. I always find it curious that the very people that put us in these seats sometimes aren't involved in the process and don't have a voice. I will always support communicating with and engaging with our community because I trust them. This is a well-informed group of people in this community, and so I think we really have to be careful that we respect the fact that they do have an important voice in how this community is planned. And so I'll leave it at that. I will not support the motion, and I agree with the other comments by the mayor and Councillors Patterson and Braithwaite. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton, did you want to weigh in or no? Okay, then I'm going to call the question. All in favor of the motion on the table? Councillor Smart, Councillor Watson, Councillor Appleton, all opposed? Councillor Patterson, Mayor Murdoch, Councillor Green, and Councillor Braithwaite. So I'm going to look to you, Mayor, because I think you have some motions that you might choose to make.
Yeah, I was going to move that, let me go back to the original wording, that council direct staff to prepare amendment bylaws for the following recommendations in Table 2, and maybe if perhaps you will just bring up the report and bring up Table 2 as be helpful. 2.2.4, which is increased maximum height for accessory dwelling units. 2.2.6, which is improve infill densities and actually maybe just not that one. As much as I'd like to do that, I don't think it's urgent at this point. So 2.2.4, 2.4.2, discourage basements and accessory dwelling units. 2.5.1, adjust setbacks for ADUs on larger lots. 2.6.2, reduce overlook from accessory dwelling units.
Point of clarification, could you please speak more slowly?
Sure, my apologies. Yeah.
Please start again.
Yeah, no worries. I will speak more slowly. 2.2.4, which is the increased maximum height for ADUs in all residential zones. Then 2.4.2, which is discourage basements in ADUs. And 2.5.1, which is adjust setbacks for ADUs on larger lots. 2.6.2, reduce overlook from accessory dwelling units. And down to 2.8.1, this is impervious surface materials, to define impermeable surface. 2.8.2, which is establish regulations for impermeable surfaces. 2.8.3, require consolidated live landscaping areas. 2.8.4, clarify the calculation of paved coverage in rear yard. Then 2.11.1, which is maintain existing limits on driveway accesses. 2.11.2, clarify the intent of access provisions for street townhouses. 2.12.1, which is require consolidated soil volumes in small lot residential zones. So really just all the regulations related to ADUs, permeable surfaces, and driveway access.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that motion? I've seconded. Do you wish to motivate or?
Yeah, I thank you, Chair. At the end of the day, I think we do, looking at some of the already our initial ADU contemplation that came forward to council and some other, hearing the interest from the community in this. I think this is one that we have to be nimble and look at changes as they come forward. I think we need probably a bit more debate as these bylaws come back as to what those exact numbers are. I think we've had a bit of debate on some of those pieces. I do think things like impermeable surface may need to be looked at slightly differently than a percentage, but I think it's time for us to move those forward and start contemplating them. And then at that point, if we feel like some of that needs to go for more public input or something, we could do that. But really, I think let's get the bylaws back, having had a conversation here, and move those aspects forward at this time. I think all of those are changes to scenarios that would have, I think, notable community benefit and are in alignment with what I recall and what was listed here in terms of the first four or primary aspects of the pieces that we asked for this information to come back. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the seconder wish to comment at all? No. Okay. Any other comments? Councillor Smart.
Yeah, speaking against the motion, I really feel strongly against this process for tonight. This doesn't give us the opportunity to have a conversation around the table substantially for each item. It's one person's list. I'm sure everyone would have a different list at this table. I don't feel like this then allows each of us to inform each other, our experience and thoughts on each of these items. And I feel like it now leaves a very comprehensive project in disarray that all these things are going to come back one at a time as being things that we could have considered but didn't consider. So I don't agree with the process. I think it's more appropriate if we're going to do this to honestly go through either an exclusionary process or a line item one at a time, and I'm prepared to do that tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton.
Speaking against the motion on the floor, absolutely concur 100%. If this is taking issue with any of the recommendations that are presented here, staff have packaged these recommendations together as a whole in order to present them as being easily actioned and responding specifically to council's previous direction on this matter. If we are going to parse certain recommendations out of this list, I feel strongly in terms of engagement and in terms of proper debate that each one of these is dealt with separately. And I would consider that and as Councillor Smart has stated, I'm prepared to have that debate and review each one of these one by one if that's what's required. But I do not concur with the process, and I concur. I could come up with my own list, and and that was not how I approached the analysis of this matter, because staff have taken the consultant's recommendations and presented them in response to what previous council direction and council's strategic direction has been. So I take those as an entirety based on their professional recommendation. If that's going to be parsed apart, that was not my understanding of what the approach to this matter was going to be tonight. So if that's what we intend to do, then I absolutely will participate in that, but I will not support a subsection of recommendations out of this list presented by staff. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
If I may?
Sure.
Just, in terms of process, I hear what's being suggested there. I absolutely don't think this has to be the only pieces. I've just sort of went through what I saw in the pieces under climate change, livability, or in transportation under the council priority pieces, and just sort of flag those. I think it's totally appropriate for council to debate these individually, and if the board body wishes to make amendments to it, I just made a first cut at this, so I don't want to suggest that by making a partial list that it would preclude us from having a debate. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to support the motion because I think that these are things that when I look at this list, I am comfortable with those things moving forward. We may add other things to it, but on a first go through, I think that these are things that are supportable because there's other things on this list that I don't feel that are supportable at this point in time. So I will be supporting the motion. So if I don't have any other comments, I'm going to call the questions. So this is to support the items that are put forward in this motion, and all in favor? That's Councillor Patterson, Murdoch, Councillor Green, and Councillor Braithwaite in favor, and opposed? Councillor Smart, Councillor Watson, Councillor Appleton. Thank you. Are there any further motions that anyone would like to make? Councillor Appleton.
I would ask direction from the chair with respect to the items that are not included here. The original staff recommendation included two components of recommendations. It included the table 2 for inclusion and table 3 for future consideration. There are a number, with the motion just passed, there's a number of recommendations on the table 2 list which are not moving forward. I would ask for direction from council and from the mover of the original motion as to what shall be the disposition of the remaining matters from table 2.
Thank you. I mean, I'm assuming that those items would be then put onto table 3 for future actions, but I'll let the mayor answer that.
Turn to staff on that one. I would think we would need a motion for any of the remaining things on table 2 to be included. Otherwise, they would just disappear procedurally. So I think if council wishes to bring these back, it probably is appropriate to move that the remaining items on table 2 be added to recommendations from table 3 as a project backgrounder for consideration of the 2025 council priorities. And I'm happy to make that motion.
Okay. So that motion has been made. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Green?
Well, maybe I shouldn't do that because Councillor Appleton had the floor, so I was just answering a question. I'll give it back to Councillor Appleton.
So Councillor Appleton.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm just looking for what the actual disposition would be. I'm unlikely to make such a motion because I did not approve of the original of those recommendations being removed from the motion in the first place. So I will leave it to the will of council.
Okay, I think if you're not willing to make that motion and no one else does, then as the mayor has pointed out, we lose those recommendations. Correct? Looking to staff, yes. Yeah, staff is nodding in correctness. Okay. Mayor Murdoch, do you want to do anything else? Or Councillor Smart?
Well, thank you. I would like to start moving forward a series of motions for us to consider the other items under table 2. So I would like to start with a motion, and I don't want to package them in too large of a package because each one are going to involve a certain amount of discussion. So I'd like to move forward, and if everyone's looking at table 2, I'm going to categorize them. So this is about height. So I'm looking at height. So I'd like to move forward 2.2.1, 2.2.2, 2.2.6, and 2.2.7.
Seconder.
Second.
I'm afraid if we're going to go through this whole process, I'm not really sure how this is going to end up around the table because, well, we'll see what happens. Okay, go ahead and motivate.
Thank you. So looking at the height recommendations, I can understand that council may not have the appetite for 2.2.3, which I left off, which is increasing the maximum height. However, there was some really excellent recommendations around updating the definition of building height, removing the definition of roof height, and improving the infill densities in the commercial zones to be consistent with the building heights, and rewording the single-story designation in the R5 zone. I saw these all as very housekeeping-oriented things. The definition of building height has been problematic for a long time now in Oak Bay from the perspective of designers, and this really clears up what really was a bias that really was detrimental to the design of energy efficient buildings and different building forms that are coming forward today. So I feel very strongly that the items that I've mentioned to move forward would have very significant positive impacts to our infill housing program. Thank you.
Councillor, anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor
Thank you.
Watson.
I fully support that. I had hoped that these would go forward tonight. I think they are one wonderful, clear, straightforward simplification of something that has been very complex and hard to understand by members of the community. So I strongly support this motion.
Mayor Murdoch.
Yeah, thank you. I have a feeling, so, I mean, I'm concerned, these may be the only ones related to height, but they are attached to all the other aspects in this report. And I think we're in danger of getting down a path, you know, like specifically on I don't necessarily want to go through all my notes on these things. But, you know, the building height languages is, you know, removed occupiable height to allow different changes internally. I think that makes a lot of sense. But the building height definition is changing it without changing other pieces, just removing the roof height definition. And there's aspects of that impact design that I'd be concerned about. You know, the 45-degree roof angle, which is seen as a positive, is sort of not seen architecturally. I don't think is terribly positive. I think there's aspects here that would increase massing without adding any additional space and density through some of the building definitions. What was the other one you have in here? The commercial zones, again, I'm supportive of that. I just left it off my list because I think until it's saying align it, but we haven't changed the height at this point. So I'm not sure what that would change. And then the single story designation, didn't go into this, but I'm not clear on what those changes are, to be totally honest. It refers to single-story form language, but the intention of that was always, the effect of it is to allow for greater coverage for single-story houses, and that's the single-story houses then defined by certain heights and so forth. And that was to allow, you know, small lots to still allow single-family or single-story forms. So that to my mind involves a great deal of conversation and ramifications and impact. Does it change the viability of those single-family or single-story homes? I don't know, but those are big questions. And again, without delving into this, the multitude and all of it, I just think we're getting into a lot of things that may have a lot of complexity here and impacts that we haven't had a chance to debate in great detail. And again, separating them out, even though they're just height, has effects on things like that are offset by things like dormer definitions and things later in the report. So I just can't support this approach to doing it. I think primary building, siting and design massing should be dealt with holistically, and I think we've already addressed that as a council, whether we're interested in moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? So I'm going to call the question on the motion. All in favor? Councillor Appleton, Watson, and Smart in favor. All opposed? Councillor Patterson, Green, Braithwaite, and Mayor Murdoch opposed. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Chair, could I possibly just ask a clarifying question to staff? I'm assuming that I couldn't move forward the dormer category because we would have to have moved forward the definition of building height previously in order to consider that item. Could I just confirm that possibly through you, Chair?
Absolutely. Ms. Elmore.
Thank you. Through the chair, that is correct. We added that recommendation as a subsequent recommendation to one that removed the regulation of gables from the regulation of height.
Thank you. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I'd like to move forward the inclusion under the next category of basements to include 2.4.1 and 2.4.3 to move forward with the previous motion of categories.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I felt like these, again, were very considered items. Particularly, I'll start with enabling access to daylight in basement living spaces. This is something I feel very passionate about. I think it's really important that we consider what these guidelines are creating when it comes to built form. And our consultant has looked at the current policy and given some very good recommendations around how we can improve the outcome of the built form. So we're looking at enabling access to daylight to ensure that basement living spaces have access to natural light, particularly for basement suites, to reduce the need for blasting, reduce use of energy intensive materials, and to reduce the risk of flooding and impacts from groundwater. The floor area exemption criteria. So this is for the basement ceiling heights up to 1.3 meters. This seems like a small thing, but it is quite a huge thing with regards to, again, just encouraging the livability of the spaces that are going to be created with regards to access to daylight. These are projects that are going to go forward this year, and if we delay this, we are going to have numerous buildings built, likely with basements that will have less access to daylight because of the way the wording of our bylaw is written. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mayor Murdoch.
Again, I'm totally sympathetic to the wording there. Again, though, without getting into the minutiae of this one, the requiring all buildings to have 1.1 meters above grade, I just, it's in opposition to what, most houses or single-family houses are putting in right now, and just, it's, I get the rationale, but the current regulations don't restrict anything as long as it can be 1.3 meters. So, we're making a requirement here that I just, and stripping away all of the provisions for existing heritage homes that were put in there to make sure that they were exempted. I just think for a minor amount of saying this is, we're requiring it in some cases for new builds, we're almost incentivizing the destruction of older homes by making it so complicated to exist. So I agree with both of these, both the things. I think that realistically, if they're not looked at them a little bit more thoroughly and carefully, then we're at risk of having unintended consequences on this. Again, part of the overall whole that I think we do need to consider some separation between existing and new buildings that aren't contemplated in these bylaw changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Councillor Watson, Appleton, and Smart in favor. All opposed? Councillor Patterson, Green, Mayor Murdoch, and Councillor Braithwaite opposed. Anything else, Councillor Smart?
Thank you. Moving on to the section for privacy and overlook. I'm just noticing, so we have moved forward 2.6.2. I would like to move forward 2.6.1 and 2.6.3.
Your seconder? Seconded by Councillor Appleton. Ovation?
Yeah, thank you. I think that privacy and overlook are really important considerations when it comes to our accessory dwelling units, and I appreciate that the consultant has taken a closer look at this and has given some recommendations for these buildings to consider privacy and overlook, and I think we should consider these two motions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mayor Murdoch? Yeah.
I think my general concerns here remain with
Yeah.
these specific ones. I think they tie to the overall design pieces that we should be considering.
Yeah, and I honestly, I can't support the second story setback. We've kind of beaten that one to death in the past, and so I can't support. I'm sorry. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Watson, Councillor Smart, and Councillor Appleton opposed. Councillor Green, Councillor Patterson, Mayor Murdoch, and Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I will move forward the category of garage siting, which is 2.71 through 2.74.
Seconded by Councillor Appleton. Motivation?
Thank you. I really appreciated the consultant's look on this from the point of view of incentivizing garages over living space, and I felt like the fine-tuning of these requirements, although I don't feel I would be fine also if we decided to get rid of these requirements, but I feel like this is one step better in the direction of having our bylaws actually speak for our values. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton.
Not speaking specifically to the specifics of this motion on the floor, Chair, but I would ask that, as has been Council's practice in the past and has been repeated around the Council table many times, that if members of Council are intending to vote against the motion on the floor, that they indicate their reasons for doing so.
And I think that's Councillor's prerogative if they choose to do that. I think that your Council colleagues have heard you on that. So, does anybody wish to give reasons why they may be voting against or for this motion? Councillor Green.
Well, thank you. And responding to your comment, Councillor Appleton, frankly, I supported the first motion, which was complete for me, and this exercise is a bit frustrating, quite frankly. We made a motion.
Point of order, Chair?
Go ahead. I can't press my button, so somebody has to turn their mic on. Go ahead, point of order.
Is the councillor implying that the process that is being followed right now out of step with the council procedure bylaw?
No, I wasn't saying that at all. What I was saying was I supported the original motion made by the mayor, moving forward a number of those points. I do not support moving forward any others, and that is why I have not spoken specifically to each of the motions that I opposed. So that's the point. The point is that I think this is quite difficult. We made a motion, and I think there was, we all commented on it. And I'm not commenting on these motions because I don't support them. I think we had a very good motion before us with a number of items that we're going to move forward. So that's why I haven't explained my particular reason. And I've been consistent.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Anybody else? Councillor Watson.
Yes, and in this case, I just want to say that I will not support the motion because I really don't understand the totality of what's being asked for, and I wouldn't feel comfortable with everything else that's been brought forward by Councillor Smart and seconded by Councillor Appleton. So far, I really have understood the implications and what is being proposed and the reasons why, but here I don't, so I in good conscience, I can't support it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mayor Murdoch.
Sorry, just for my clarification, I was taking notes, but I just want to make sure we're looking at just 2.7.1. Is that the motion?
2.7.1, 2, 3, and 4. Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, actually, again, agree with aspects of these and have concerns about others. I think we're getting into the weeds about appearance of parking and garage doors. I think the specifics of the setback and of the front of the building are I think need to be shifted, and I agree that there's some complexity here about what the transfer is and other aspects that deserve more time and place if we're going to do this. My general feeling on this is that parking is going to be one of those things that's going to come back to us in multifamily units, and while I think these deserve to be changed, I think we probably could use a bit more lived experience to get a sense of what works and what doesn't work as we come back. And so I'm actually kind of in support of these general approaches. I at this point can't support the motion as it stands, just because again it fits into the totality of the whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I agree with what's been said, and I did state right from the beginning, I was concerned about the parking and impermeable surfaces, and a lot of these tie together, and so I could, continue to say that every time these come up. I don't really see the benefit in doing that, having stated it the first time.
Thank you, and I would concur with the mayor's comments, so we'll be voting against this as well. So I'm going to call the question on the motion. All in favor? Councillor Smart and Appleton in favor. All opposed? Councillor Green, Watson, Braithwaite, Patterson, and Mayor Murdoch opposed. Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to move forward the inclusion for, I think its category was private open space. It's 2.10.1, 2.10.2, and 2.10.3. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder? Second by Councillor Appleton. Motivation? And just to let you know, it's 6 minutes to the hour, so I'm going to have a motion soon for extending the meeting, but go ahead on your motivation.
Thank you. I hope that all of council can take a moment to turn to this page and actually look at this information. So we're on page 42 of 62 of the agenda. While it's true we didn't specifically ask for form and character guidelines, I do appreciate that the consultant has come forward with some recommendations that would increase the character and streetscape of our infill housing. So we're talking about expanding the floor area exemption for verandas. This is something I feel very passionately about. I think that these are the kind of community spaces that private buildings can have that actually provide an amazing connection with neighbors. We're ensuring private open space for ADUs and secondary suites, and I think just because we can't maybe legally enforce that past the point of occupancy doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. If these spaces are not designed originally, there's no way they will exist, whereas if we ask for it, there's a chance they might exist. And this is a point of equity in design when it comes to designing secondary suites and ADUs, and it's something that I think it's really important to consider as we create these new building typologies. The third one is exempting floor area for decks above grade. Again, when we're looking at designing buildings where we want resilient communities, where we want connections between neighbors, we need to be encouraging the type of buildings that have these opportunities for people to engage when people are walking by their house. And I think it's also, too, it speaks to the aesthetics that I think people really enjoy about Oak Bay and some of the older heritage houses, where you have more inundation of the building form. And so I think these are really lovely, simple recommendations that, yes, they're form and character. I think these would be great additions to what we're looking at for this bylaw.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to this? Mayor Murdoch.
Just maybe a question for the consultant on the verandas. I read that. I was a little confused by when the verandas first came in as a piece, the recommendation here to apply it to units within a multifamily, I'm confused by that, just because it seems like it's a building form, not a unit form. Perhaps the consultant could explain that.
Thank you. And perhaps before we go to the consultant, I can ask for a motion to extend the meeting. I would suggest that we go till at least 10:30.
I'll move that we go to 10:20.
10:20. Is there a seconder? Oh, sorry. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. We do have another item on the agenda still.
I understand. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So is there a seconder to go to 10:20? If there's no seconder, oh, there is. Okay, seconded by Councillor Smart. We just called the question on this. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Okay, so we will extend till 10:20 so far. And we'll go now to you, Ms. Elmore.
Thank you. Through the chair, this recommendation came about in order to clarify a floor area exemption provision in the zoning bylaw under 4.6.11.5, where verandas, when they meet certain conditions, are exempt up to a certain amount, but only in the R4 and R5 zone. So together with staff, we considered that the exemption should be clarified in terms of how it applies, in terms of applying to all units in infill development, as well as extending that exemption to the other residential zones in order to encourage that architectural detailing. Thank you.
So just for clarifying, it says to all infill units, so is it all infill primary residential buildings then? Is that what that should read? Through you, Chair?
Elmore?
Through the chair, I believe the intent would be to extend that exemption to all units. So it would apply to an ADU, or it would apply to each of the 3 units in a triplex, or 4 units in a townhouse form, for example.
Okay, thank you. Based on that answer, I can't support the motion that's on the floor. That intention was around when it came in, was really looking at it from a building perspective facing the street. It was to allow that welcoming aspect. I totally agree with Councillor Smart on that, but it, applying it to ADUs or to other units doesn't make sense to me. I think the other piece as well, again, supportable in their own way. I think they all cumulatively add to the effective massing of a building, and I think we just need to treat them all holistically with a single approach. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. And basically, I vote against this for the same reason as the mayor just said. When I read it, it made sense as if I think of a single unit dwelling, but if I think of a multi-unit dwelling or an accessory dwelling unit, it didn't make as much sense to me. So that's why I am voting against it at this point in time.
Councillor Green.
I will not support the motion based on the other comments that have already been made by colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, and I would echo that as well. I'll be voting against it as well. So I'm Councillor Smart for the second time.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment that, from a design perspective, I think multifamily buildings, there's even more reason to create these spaces where neighbors can interact with one another. It's building community even on your lot. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call a question. All in favor of the motion? Councillor Smart, Councillor Appleton, Councillor Watson, and those opposed? Councillor Green, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Braithwaite, and Mayor Murdoch. Thank you. I think that then brings this to an end. Oh, Councillor Smart, you have one more.
I believe we haven't yet made a motion. I would make a motion to move all items that have not been moved forward from table 2 to be included with other future actions when a project backgrounder is brought back. Thank you.
Okay, do you have motivation or no? You don't have to have motivation.
I will say, I don't want to lose track of these things. This was work that was done. We need to at least decide again that we don't want to do these things and not lose them. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments? No. Councillor Appleton.
I'm not going to, speaking in opposition to the motion on the floor, the only reason that I'm opposing this motion is because I do not support them being added to table 3 to be considered later. I was going to make a motion to refer them to the next committee of the whole meeting for future debate. So if that's the alternative, then we will go with the will of council. But if I have heard multiple times around the council table this evening that there's a bunch of many of the items that were not supported off of table 2 were potentially supportable, but not in exclusion of discussion with their relationship to other elements. So I would like to have that holistic discussion of how they relate to one another. So I certainly, the motion on the floor, as I understand it, does not give us the immediate opportunity to do that. I would like to do that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Then I'm going to call, Councillor Green.
Yeah, very quickly, back to a point that I think Councillor Appleton made a while ago in terms of the bylaw itself. Nothing is immutable. Anything can be brought back and revised. just that these items will go forward to table 3 doesn't mean that they always have to be there, that any of us or all of us can have a later discussion and bring some back that have great meaning. So I think that same argument applies to this process tonight. Nothing is immutable.
Thank you. Mayor Murdoch.
Very quickly, supporting the motion, I think it's helpful to have these items in conjunction with the longer term items to be contemplated. I think that's the appropriate time if we want to, advance some of these or do more work on some of these, then we can consider them within that overall context. And again, consider the priorities as in there. And I do note things like retention of existing homes never made this short-term list, and maybe there's an opportunity at that point to consider these in that construct. So I'm supportive of all these coming back as part of that consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Appleton opposed. Motion passes. Thank you very much, and thank you staff and Ms. Elmore for your patience as we worked our way through this. And now we will move on to item 7.2, which is the Elgin Road Public Works Park Site Space Implications and Options. And I believe we're going to have Director Robertson, Mr. Rennick come forward. And Director Robertson, will it be you talking first? Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you. I'll just be brief in my comments as you have the report before you. The focus of this report is about the need for space at the Parks and Public Works Yard and some options that would free up some of the required space. We could use the quip space, the final frontier. Sorry, just trying to bring some lightness to the subject. It's, I won't do the live long and prosper part. It also helps deal with some of the risks that were outlined in the report. And it should be noted these proposals are only part of the solution. Other measures will be needed to be taken in the future to increase the usable working space at the yard. As noted in the report, the main proposal is to reduce the Elgin Road drop-off program so that we no longer accept garbage or recycled materials and only accept green waste. This is only possible because there are other options available either curbside or regionally. And this space would be turned over to core operations. As I've noted in my report, other municipalities have transitioned away from these programs, and in fact, about half don't even take green waste at this time, but it's provided for elsewhere. Although there is a cost savings involved, this is not the driver. It's the need for more space at the Public Works and Parks Yard. With the expansion of our capital construction programs and an increase in our maintenance activities, we're increasingly squeezed for space. We are parking a number of vehicles off-site in unsecured locations and materials as well. And this comes with inherent risks. Just this past weekend, I learned that 3 of our vehicles were vandalized while at Carnarvon Park. So we now have 2 leaf vacs that are out of commission at a time when we need them. And we also have a tandem dump truck that is out of commission. This will cause service disruptions until we're able to get them back, source parts and get them back in place. So freeing up secured space at Public Works will help, but even this change isn't enough to store all the vehicles and materials as we would like to and should be doing. So we're asking you to consider the options before you. These support our core operations while still providing options both within the district and outside that most municipalities utilize as part of their programs, and we'd be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Robinson. And we'll go to this table for questions first. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you somewhat for the report, Mr. Robertson. I mean, I certainly watched equipment being shifted around. I've expressed concern about not having proper secured compounds for equipment, and it is very difficult circumstances. I do appreciate that. But in the report, it does say that our public works yard is not of a size that would be appropriate if you were designing one today for this size of a community. It's 2.37 acres. So I'm just wondering if in the information that has been gathered, if the area that is required could be defined more, so that, just so that it would be helpful to understand kind of the magnitude of the problem.
Thank you. Director Robertson.
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, that would be something that would be defined through the upcoming facility assessment process that's coming up in a couple of years' time. So I don't have anything solid to base that on, just experience in other organizations and the sorts of space, but through a proper space planning and how we could mass buildings together and more height and less footprint, we would need to look at all those things and then look at our operations to see what else we would fit around that. So that's something that I will know that we'll be able to have more information about in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson, continue.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and through you to staff. Thank you for that information. I guess the concern is, as we are in the process, as we just talked about in the preceding agenda item, if we're growing population and we're growing residences, and we all understand the state of the infrastructure and the magnitude of capital works that has to go on, will the staff be bringing something to us that lays out for us a more secure and safe way of, in fact, dealing with what we have existing, dealing with the growth, and managing the upscale of the capital projects, if that will be coming forward in a continuing report in the future?
Director Robertson.
Through the chair, just for clarification, are you asking how we can secure all of our equipment and materials given current locations?
Councillor Patterson, yes.
Yeah, in short, yes.
Sure. Through the chair, we can't do that, I don't believe, through our current location and have any room to maneuver around the site. As it is, we're in the process of moving our underground fuel storage tank above ground because it's less susceptible to leakage and all the rest of that. So we're doing the right thing, but we're going to lose another couple of parking spots. So there are all these competing things. Right now, off-site, I don't know if I stated it in the report, we have somewhere between, I believe it's 18 and 20 vehicles that are not within the Public Works compound on an ongoing basis. And so that's, when you look at moving that many in as we're currently configured, we wouldn't be able to effectively use the yard.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. And just one final question then. Looking at this and what has to be done, and the feasibility is still out in the future, but dealing with our public works yard, as is the case in most districts now, will be one of the highest cost items that we will be looking at in the near future of having to deal with. Is that a fair statement?
Director Robertson.
Through the chair, if we were to be acquiring more land to have larger space, it would be an expensive project. However, if we're able to find efficiencies on the current site. We don't have a lot of requirement for office space or other technical space, which would be more expensive. A lot of ours are shops, storage, meeting space, and obviously some administrative space. So a couple of different ways of looking at that as to how expensive it would be.
Thank you. I have Councillor Watson next, and then Mayor Murdoch.
Thank you, Chair. To Mr. Robertson, please. Could you just explain a little bit, if the proposal is accepted that we just go down to one collection service at the yard, what kind of reconfiguration is proposed or have you thought about that would actually still allow you to function in the yard, given that public vehicles, like resident vehicles, are still going to be coming into the yard to drop off and unload? It was hard for me to understand how you could carve off a space and actually gain it by eliminating these things when you still had lines of cars coming in.
Thank you, Director Robertson.
Through the chair, we would have less vehicles coming in, for one thing, and there's the possibility of reconfiguring partway up the ramp by changing the configuration of some storage there to be able to have a loop around area, which would leave more area at the top. There's large bins that right now occupy the top and small space for staff. With those gone, we pick up a lot of space for parking, for storage, and those types of things. So we would be looking to minimize, I mean, it's not the ideal situation, but we'd be looking to minimize that sort of turnaround space with the reduction of vehicles. And also, depending on what the new level of use is, there are other options that we have been discussing as far as being able to book a time slot to come in as a sort of a different innovative way of spreading out how often vehicles are coming in. So that's something that will be looked at in the future as well.
Thank you, that's helpful. And just quickly, in the report you indicate that even if this happens and it's just the one service, that there would be really no cost saving with respect to the level of staffing. And I just wanted to query that because it seemed, I would have expected some kind of reduction.
Mr. Rennick.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. The Recycle Depot portion of the operation is essentially operated at no net cost to the district, other than providing the space. The cost that would go away is the cost of hauling away the garbage from the garbage compactors. The two staff essentially are there to check decals and assist residents, and realistically, that's a minimum staffing complement. You really can't have a single person doing that job. You need to have coverage when one of them is going to the washroom, taking a break, etc. So we did look very carefully at that, and we felt that that was kind of the would still be the minimum staffing requirement.
Thank you. Next I have Mayor Murdoch and then Councillor Smart.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Just what percentage of that, so I think you touched on this, how much space would be freed up on this? I mean, I'm just looking at the map of it and it looks not like a lot. So I'm just curious, like how many more vehicles could you store with the change that's contemplated here?
Through the chair, that area is approximately 25% of the site. So, yeah, I mean, we'd have to be creative in our use of it, but as far as some of it would be for storage, like longer term storage that we would move off of the lower surface where we're using it more frequently. And then the likely would be some of the longer term vehicles that would go up there as well, freeing up the more used area in the common space below.
Thank you. Is there any opportunity perhaps to look at, doing a lease of commercial space for storage that we would have access to that isn't necessarily in Oak Bay, but might be some warehouse space in the vicinity that we could do some of our storage in?
Director Robertson.
Through the chair, we are currently looking at some space, but it's only temporary in nature. It may be for 2 or 3 years. We haven't looked at any other sites outside of Oak Bay at this point.
Thank you. And just, I know we're ramping up our services, our actual work. Is there any mechanism there by which, as we're doing, a lot of the larger projects are done through request for proposal models with external contractors? Is there opportunity there to include requirement for the contractor to provide all the storage space for materials, et cetera, as part of the RFP? Is that feasible?
Director Robertson?
Through the chair, that's usually the case. Usually materials are stored on site and they'll fence off a compound part of the street. The Uplands project has been the exception, just given the size of the project is where we've set aside space for them to store, which we felt was likely going to be a cost savings measure for that project, but normally we don't do that.
Okay, thank you for that. I have one more question, but I'm just going to make a motion to extend by another 10 minutes.
Thank you. So a motion to extend by 10 minutes, seconded by Councillor Green. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much.
Last question. Just curious if there's any possibility of using the south part of the Goldsmith parking lot, if actually fencing off the northern or the southernmost portion of that and using that as a secure storage space for some of our trucks. I know it's a bit of a contentious area with the school district and who owns it and the rec center, but curious if that's been contemplated. Through you, Chair.
Director Robertson or Mr. Rennick?
Thank you, Chair. We have been temporarily parking some vehicles on the southern portion of that lot. This was negotiated in partnership with the Recreation Department to have a minimal impact on their operations, which that was okay while the pool was shut down. However, we are receiving indications from Director Meikle that they are having patron complaints. And so while that is an area that we've certainly looked into, the broader implication for what it means for the entire district and the relationship with School District 61, I believe would have to be carefully considered.
Thank you for the answer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And now I have Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to staff, I was curious what the percentage of the site is that's covered by building. You mentioned that 25% of the site is the recycling depot, but what percentage of the site is covered by buildings?
Director Robertson.
Through the chair, looking around for other information here. No, that's one measurement I did not do. I know we have the main administration building and parks administration, and we have our vehicle maintenance depot and some other miscellaneous storage buildings. So I would not want to hazard a guess on that.
Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I'm curious, I guess, if any, through you, Chair, to staff, if any sort of more feasibilities have been done, and what would, I guess, is there something preventing us from expediting a feasibility study of what to do long term when, in a sense, we're being shown today a sort of, granted, I totally understand a Band-Aid solution, to go forward, but we're potentially being asked to consider reducing a very popular service to the community for a temporary fix when we don't even know where we're headed. So I'm just wondering what are the obstacles from us sending out a feasibility study to a consultant? Is there not the capacity on the staff side to support a feasibility study right now?
Director Robertson.
I would defer that, if I may, to Mr. Graham, who's online.
Thank you. Mr. Graham, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
If you could speak just a little louder, that would be great.
Sorry, I'm working off my laptop. It's not working great. The feasibility study is simply due to staff capacity. We're currently working on Carnarvon Park as well as the public safety building. And to add a third feasibility of this study, we simply don't have the staff capacity.
Thank you. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. So, yeah, I heard the comments around potentially the public complaining about parking if we take up more of the Goldstream parking lot, but I guess I would just ask the questions for you, Chair, to staff. Do you think you would get a lot of patron complaints if we shut down the recycling center comparatively?
Director Robertson.
Yeah, I'm sure there would be complaints about shutting down our center. However, our process would be informing them about the services that are available, and that most people are already using a number of those centers because we don't take electronics, we don't take refundables, we don't take construction materials. So people are already used to using those options. And also, as noted in the report, in 2025, we're also planning to expand the ability to have additional bins, both green or garbage, curbside. So I think there are a lot of options around, but I'm sure there would be complaints initially, but I think they're viable options that are well used by most communities.
And Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, just one additional question. Is it possible to explain a little bit more the Goldstream parking lot ownership? Because I guess I had just thought, well, there's a parking lot there. You could build a building over it and still have the parking in the long term. I'm sure there's 100 other different things that a feasibility study might bring up. So I guess I'm just curious what the ownership is of that land, and could we potentially build a building on it and have vehicles underneath and not lose any parking in the long term, but provide, be able to free up the site of buildings by building them in the parking lot there?
Director Robertson.
Through the chair, there is an agreement with the school district for that parking lot, which relates to space in the school and us providing parking. And having looked at that agreement carefully, there is, it's not clear who actually owns. I would say Oak Bay believes that that is the district property, and the school board has held on to the right to challenge that assertion. As to whether something could be built in there and working out some sort of an agreement where parking spots are still available, I think in a feasibility study that could certainly be looked at, being adjacent to the yard, and maybe the potential to mass other buildings on there at the same time to make it even more feasible.
Thank you. Councillor Green, I'm really cognizant of the time again, because I believe that we're only have up until 10:30 now. Is that correct? Because you did. So, and it's 10:26. I think we still have more questions. No, I think that I still have questions as well. So I think we need to extend for at least another 15 minutes from 10:30, so till 10:45. And then I think we're going to pull a hard stop at 10:45. So hopefully everybody can get their questions in. Is that agreeable? Would someone be willing to put that motion on the floor? Okay, thank you. Seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you, and through you to Mr. Roberts, thank you for the report. And I am aware that people in Oak Bay love the transfer station on so many levels, but I also empathize with all of the problems and issues you face. So just for clarity, you would still take garden waste essentially, and that would be it, correct? Thank you.
Director Robertson.
Through the chair, if it were my choice, I would not take any of them just for space, but for practicality, and having been through this before in another organization, I think the green waste makes sense to stay there. Possibly at some point it moves to a different site, but I think in the present we would make room for it there and would take steps to spread out the use of it so that we have less lineups, it's predictable, those types of things, and we reduce things like idling and lineups around the corner.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
And just a quick follow-up, you had referenced increases in curbside pickup. Could you just articulate those Thank you for next, it's for 2025, I think you said. Thank you very much.
Director Robertson.
Through the chair, yes, we're planning to bring some amendments shortly, which would allow for multiple garbage and green bins at curbside, and the rates for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I just have a follow-up question on that. So right now, all the taxpayers in Oak Bay pay for the service of the municipal dump. But in the future, what you're talking about is then having each individual household then choose whether or not to have that service where they can add additional garbage or green waste. And so then it's more of a user pay than what we have currently, correct?
Yes, through you, Chair. Currently, everybody pays for their curbside bins, and they could pay for additional ones. Currently, everybody pays for the ability to drop garbage off at the site, whether you use it or not. So this would move it to user pay at curbside.
Thank you. And then my only other
If
question.
I may, Chair.
Mr. Rennick.
I just wanted to clarify that the Elgin Waste Depot is actually funded out of the solid waste utility, which means it's paid for by the solid waste fee, which is paid for by the 6,000 collection units, which is primarily single-family homes and some commercial businesses. In fact, residents who live in apartment buildings who do not pay the solid waste fee are still entitled to the use of the transfer station because they are residents of Oak Bay.
And their commercial building does not pay the solid waste fee.
That is correct, because they would be required to make their own private collection arrangements.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And then my only other question was, do we allow or do we have parking of our vehicles at the police fire station at all?
Through you, Chair, we did up into the building, the new structure there. So we did. It was a more secure site because we're next to the police station. So that changed.
Thank you. I'm gonna. I know that we have to go to the public. So if there's any first-time speakers, Councillor Appleton, did you want to speak because you haven't spoken yet? I think we do have to just go to the public. So I'll do that very quickly. Is there anyone online who would like to speak to this? Put up your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody put up their hand, so then I would come back to this table. And Councillor Appleton, I believe you had a motion to make.
I'll move receipt of the staff report, Chair.
Thank you. Move receipt. A seconder. Seconded by Councillor Green. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And Councillor Appleton.
I will present a motion which is not in the options presented, Chair. I will move that options for modifying services offered at the Elgin Road drop-off facility be presented to the public through the Connect Oak Bay portal, and the resulting feedback be returned to Council for evaluation of options as presented in this report.
Seconded by Councillor Smart. Do you wish to moderate?
Thank you, Chair. We proposed the idea of a feasibility assessment. I think that we do need some public feedback on this one. This is a very well appreciated facility. It's one of the first things that people bring up when they talk about Oak Bay. I think that the consultation or presenting this information to the public should definitely be in the context of informing people that a change is necessary. But in fact, talking about which services we can do without, and I appreciate Director Robertson's comments about, that there may very well be an interest in retaining green waste as one of those core facilities, but it may very well be that the feedback indicates that maybe folks could think about doing without that. So I don't look at it from the perspective of asking for the public's feedback and then expecting them to come back and say, well, we like it as it is, and some people will say that. I think we should ask the public to present the problem situation to the public and ask them what is possible for them to do without, and to ask them to really make a serious decision based on that. So I would like to take that to the public, knowing the interest that folks have in the operation and the facility that operates in the community. And so I think that would help my decision making as far as the evaluation of the options. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does the seconder wish to motivate?
Yes, thank you. I feel like when I ask people what they love about Oak Bay, this is one of the top three is the transfer station, and so we absolutely have to hear from the public. I would have supported option 3 tonight, but I will support this motion. I think that losing these services before we know what we're doing in the big picture I can't really personally have that conversation. So I'm very much in support of hearing from the public as the next stage, and I really hope we can get to a feasibility study soon.
Thank you. Councillor Green. Sir Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I just wonder if I could get something clarified that is germane to this discussion. If as Councillor Appleton has proposed, we go out to the public first for feedback. Is there a budget implication to what staff has proposed here? And if we go out to the public, will we have that the information from the public come back and sufficient time to still have staff bring us forward something so that we get it into our financial plan for 2025?
Thank you. Director Robertson.
Through you, Chair. I think that would be a pretty tight timeline given the budget schedule and Christmas holidays in there. I think it'll be a tough fit.
Okay, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. I will support the motion. I agree that it would be important to have a dialogue, or at least gauge how our public would be feeling about this. The other thing that's ironic about this is that, and I totally understand the challenges and the issues there on site, but we talk about climate change and climate action and saving, the environment, and yet we'll be asking people to drive further and more often with the rest of the waste, and it's just an irony. That's all it is. It's no one's fault. I just find that maybe one of the arguments against closing it, because in its own way, it does provide a climate action approach to waste and travel. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Murdoch.
Yes, thank you, through you, Chair. I guess I'm supportive of the motion in principle. I guess I'm struggling a little bit with what would be included in that. So maybe I can just socialize some thoughts on this and just understand if this is sort of feasible. I mean, one I think raised here is just the inequity of payment. So like, is part of the feedback to get on, would people be willing to look at like an annual fee to have access or things of that nature? Like, are those kind of questions? I'm curious if there's any other options, like if things like batteries and metal and things can be picked up at the curbside, if we have any sort of sense of what those might, are those even possible to get curbside pickup for them? Are there things like that people use that we might be able to, soft plastics? So, what are there options here that we might consider? I think it's good to highlight sort of what the benefits to the municipality are in this, because it's going to be seen as just a loss to the community. And I guess the other question is related to Councillor Smart's sort of initial inclination was to examine opportunities for acquisition, but perhaps just including that as one of the options that Council is considering to address this. And I put that out there because I think if we say, here's what we're contemplating, give us your feedback, I know what we're going to hear. People are going to say, keep it. And for the small amount of benefit you get, we're losing all these nice services. So I think it'd be helpful for people to understand sort of the complexity of the options that we have and sort of put it out in a way that allows for some of that feedback. So I'm supportive of it, but I'm cautious here because I think if we just if we keep the question too simple, we're just going to get hammered with, of course, keep it because we love it, which is fair. We all love it. Thanks.
Thank you. I was sitting around this table when we took away the garbage day. I don't know if anybody else remembers garbage day, where you could put out whatever you wanted in front of your house, and then everybody from all the other communities would come and pick through it, and then it would get picked up and taken away. And I mean, that was costing us Yeah, yeah, and it'd also drop off the garbage. That was costing us probably $85,000 a year, and that was, 10 or 15 years ago. So, and we had a big blowback from that, but people got over it. Okay, so I'm not seeing any more comments. Oh, go, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. And while I agree with what has been said here, and I certainly understand how much the public loves the facility and will be very disappointed, I also put my other hat on, and I know as I'm walking around the district, I see so much expensive equipment that is not secured, that can be vandalized or become another liability to the district if, God forbid, somebody decided to hotwire something and move off with a piece of equipment. But if we are going to be serious about scaling up the infrastructure capital work, we will need the space, and we will need the space pretty rapidly. In fact, we needed it already last year. And so I support really option one as staff has recommended, just to reduce risk and be able to allow us to move forward, to continue with the projects. And I just don't think we have the luxury of affording too much time to be expanded. But I do think that we have to very firmly explain to the public why this is necessary, because I don't think the public are going to like hearing that we have to repair or replace equipment, expensive equipment, if it's vandalized.
Thank you. And I mean, I totally hear what you're saying, Councillor Patterson, but I am supportive of this motion. I just hope that we can get something in the works on the Connect Oak Bay pretty quickly, so that we can get something back to council pretty quickly. Okay, so I think we've talked about that enough. So I'm going to call the question on the motion. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Councillor Patterson opposed. That passes. So thank you very much, and thank you, Mayor Murdoch.
Just a test of motion arising on this as well. I think just to direct staff to bring back options and impacts of using the south part of the Goldsmith parking lot as a secure parking area. We heard that it has an impact on the rec center. I hear that. It may have an impact on the school. I hear that. But I think we need to explore it. I think that is one place we could put up a fence on that thing. So the motion here is just really to come back and just help us understand what the cost would be and what the impacts would be.
Seconder? Seconded? Okay. I don't think we need to, we do need to discuss. Councillor Smart, we have 5 minutes.
Apologies, I'll be really quick. I just wondered if we wanted to broaden that just to potentially include other sites. Like I'm thinking about the small parking lot across from the Monterey Center. Like, are there, do we want to broaden the wording just so that options could come back beyond that parking lot? Just asking the mover.
My intention here is just that parking lot is adjacent to the public works yard, and the other one has so much impact on the business community, I'd have a hard time.
Okay, so I'm going to call a question on that motion. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you very much, Director Robertson and Mr. Rennick. Did we have to receive that report? Did we have a motion for that? Did we? Okay, thank you. Okay, so our next item is new business. Is there any new business? Seeing none, I would call for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Green. Second by Mayor Murdoch. All in favor? Thank you very much. Any opposed? No. Thank you, everybody, for sticking it out until now.
Thank you, Chair, for managing that.